Her sobs broke the silence. She picked up the phone and looked back at the door and lowered her voice. "It's Daddy, who do you have to be to do that to your own daughter?" Come on, calm down," said her friend. "You probably just didn't understand him. Stop crying. Let's go for a walk. After an hour, it will be bearable to be outside." "I'm not going out. I don't want to." It's an early summer this year. The heat was unbearable in the northern city, and people tried to stay indoors. But at night, when the heat subsided, one could finally relax, breathe normally, and even take a walk on the street. The city lived only at night, but the girl who was pacing around the room, holding her phone to her ear, obviously didn't notice the heat. "You think I'm kidding?" "No, I wouldn't have thought of that. I would never have thought of it," she wailed in a high-pitched voice. "That's it, Patrick, that's it. I belong on the street from now on. My dad took me to some creepy. I don't know, I can't even find the words to describe it. You haven't seen it. It's like the walls and the corners are all squeezed together. It's like it's going to close up and crush you. I got claustrophobic in that hole." "Really? What's cramped and small?" Patrick asked with a chuckle in his voice. "I don't know how a person can live in there, and I just don't know what I'm supposed to do now." The guy she was talking to sounded cheerful. She immediately imagined Patrick lying in a cool bathtub playing with bubbling bubbles of foam and listening to her absent-mindedly, half-heartedly. He's saying something just so she won't think he's drowned, but in reality he doesn't care and doesn't care about her problems. It's not like he's being evicted from his house. So why worry? He's just messing with you. Silly. He made it up a little bit and you believed it. "Drink some cold water and go to bed. You're worrying like a child over nothing," Patrick said. "Are you laughing?" Brooke shrieked. "I'm not laughing at all. I told you. I've seen the slums with my own eyes. And Dad was serious about responsibility and stuff. He was talking to me like I was stupid." "It was a joke," Patrick replied lazily. "A stupid one, of course. But let's discount the parents' advanced age. A joke. A joke. This horror is a dump. You think it's a joke." Linda raised her voice too. "Listen to me, get some rest. And for God's sake, don't worry about any of this nonsense. How old is your daddy now? Maybe it's an age thing. What do you call it when you get old? And you get old? I was just kidding. I thought it was funny. Don't worry about nothing." He passed out. And the girl looked at the extinguished screen of the phone for a long time. So much for the friend. As long as you could copy her notes and hang out in coffee shops, a friend. Now it's don't worry about nothing, Linda. Angry, deleted Patrick's number. That's not what friends do. What exactly friends don't do, she didn't want to ponder. Patrick hadn't taken her problems seriously, and that was enough to cause her resentment. One good piece of advice he'd given her, though, was to get some rest. She would do just that. And tomorrow, who knows, maybe everything that had happened would turn out to be just a bad dream. Without undressing, she stretched out on the bed and closed her eyes. She fell asleep very quickly, so that she didn't hear the door to her room open softly. A tall, gray-haired man peered through the narrow crack. "You dozed off," Rafael whispered. Nika was beautiful. Her golden curls were strewn across the pillow. A light, youthful blush played on her cheeks. Rafael admired his daughter. What can I say? God had not offended her with anything. He had given her a figure, a face, a gentle voice, and a mind. She had graduated from school with a gold medal. She spoke 3 languages as if they were her native ones. But the character of the daughter, as it turns out. Perhaps I myself am to blame for this, the man thought. Spoiled too much. So she got used to it. But how could he, who knew need and hunger, not spoil his princess? In his youth, Rafael, then just Meducan, often had to hear the common phrase that parents who have known difficult times in their lives are divided into 2 categories. Some try hard to give their children everything that they themselves were deprived of. Others, on the contrary, believe that since they had nothing, their children will do without. Rafael himself belonged to the former. What kept him going when he wore clothes after his older brothers? And in the yard their whole family was teased as ragamuffins. When he once heard the class teacher, an old bitch, say to the head teacher, "There's nothing to encourage Rafael. Let him go to vocational school after the 9th grade. Children from such poor families grow up and live in poverty too. Believe my experience." When he, a poorly dressed and perpetually hungry student, grabbed any job and mopped floors and worked as a janitor, and from unloading railcars did not turn his nose up, and when his first enterprise went bankrupt, so much so that he then spent 2.5 months in hospital with a broken head and thought that everything was over. When he was discharged and somehow got home, and instead of his beloved found only a note, "I'm leaving you. Get out of it yourself." When? There were not many of them. These went in his colorful and so rich in adventure life. But every time he repeated to himself, "My children will have everything," that's what kept him going. That's what gave him strength every time to get up after a fall and go to his goal. And how often only this stubborn thought kept him from giving up. And there were days when it seemed like a good way out. Many of his acquaintances, his partners, even his childhood friends weren't looking for more. They had taken quiet jobs and were quite happy with their lives. Not much pay, yes, but no responsibility. Weekends, the beginning and end of the working day, strictly on schedule. Once Rafael stopped by the reunion party and heard a lot about the advantages of this way of life. A person needs stability, like under Soviet rule, said his classmates, to work from work, and then free time. And all these businesses, all this noise, all this headache. I, for example, come home from work at 7:30 in the evening, have dinner and lie down to watch movies, and on my legal day off I rest as I wish. That's how Rafael's classmate Max Semyonov expressed the general opinion. Tell me, is it bad, he asked. But why is it bad? It's great, you're thinking. What about you, Matyukin? What's your life like? You come home, eat and work till night, just from home. Do you ever have weekends? I take vacation sometimes, Rafael smiled. I rest for a week, and then I go back into action. I'm doing fine, Max grinned. I studied well. Everything is in order, Eagle. I have a normal, human vacation, but I earn less than you. That's true. But you don't work too hard, Rafael calmed him down. You're right. Max, as he had been a bully and a brawler since high school, and still hadn't changed. Even his whirls would have been just as belligerent, if not for the short haircut. The only thing missing was the scattering of freckles on his nose. Rafael often thought that Max and those who, like him, had decided to settle for less were right. There was no arguing with that. Indeed, a quiet, measured life, a guaranteed advance payment at the beginning of the month, and a salary at the end. With such stability, you can buy a car on credit and an apartment on mortgage. But he himself, despite all the temptation, could not live like that, and he realized it. First, he was tired of routine and could not exist for long without a new project. A business should be exciting, so that you want to plunge into it, and otherwise it is not necessary. This is the personal formula for success that Rafael derived for himself. And secondly, he was guided by the same mantra, my children will have everything. And he went directly to this goal, overcoming any obstacles on his way. That's probably why he had Linda a little late for his firstborn, Rafael. When he first held his newborn daughter in his arms, he was already in his early 40s. She's going to be my princess, he promised his wife. Our little girl will have everything and more. And he kept his word. His late wife would have been proud of him. It all started out strangely. Linda, of course, grew up a spoiled girl, but not immensely. She didn't demand private planes to fly to school. She never turned her nose up at the servants, and even helped with cleaning or in the kitchen. Rafael thought that he had every reason to be proud of his daughter. Well, the girl had grown up, graduated from high school, then got a higher education, and her father decided it was time for her to start her own life. I gave her a mansion and got her a job where she will be paid $500,000 as a young specialist, said gloomily school friend and desperate Max Semyonov. Everyone should have such a start in life. She'll look for herself, Rafael objected. Personally, I bought her a small studio apartment. Less mess with cleaning and repairs. The rent is cheaper, too. Max looked at his friend with horror and admiration at the same time. But you give, he exclaimed. She is your princess, grew up as a princess, and now you her as a blind kitten in this life. Why did you work so hard then? You didn't spare yourself to put your own daughter on the street like that. Max, Rafael chided him. Shame on you. Why like a blind kitten? She has a diploma, she has a profession. Let her now use the knowledge she's gained, put it to her advantage. And why the street? I bought her her own place. Remember us when we were young, said Rafael. Remember, don't be lazy. Do you remember how we were living in rented corners in dormitories? For us, our own corner was a dream, and my daughter will have it immediately. There is a place to live. There is something to earn. What else do you need? She's got brains, she'll manage. And I'll always help her if she needs it. And why not help? If a person is working, striving for something. Maybe you're right. Max thought about it, but only, well, what if she will not strive for anything? She will sit down on a salary and say that she doesn't need anything else. If she doesn't need anything else, she doesn't need anything else, Rafael answered. Then she'll be satisfied with what she has. Why should I interfere? The apartment her father had bought for Linda was not far from the city center. Although it wasn't huge, it had been thoughtfully planned. In addition, it was impossible to overestimate the park nearby, the proximity of bus stops and supermarkets a few steps from the entrance. But this gift from her father didn't impress Linda at all. What is it? The girl asked confusedly, looking at her new home for the first time. Is this a joke? There's nothing here. There's no dressing room, no bathroom and toilet, and not even a shower. If I just want to take a shower, do I have to get in the tub? And there's no parking in the yard. Decent people just leave their cars under the windows. What about the kitchen? It's so small, you can't even put a bar counter or more than 2 chairs in it. Rafael was not too surprised by these questions. The girl was used to living in a very different way, but now something had changed. The kitchen is small, he agreed, but you live alone. There is no one else in the family. A kitchen like this will do for one person. There's a place to cook, a table where you can eat breakfast, lunch and dinner. What are you missing? Okay, let's say Linda agreed reluctantly. Where am I supposed to park my car? Linda asked, looking out the window again. There's no parking lot. Can you imagine if I parked in someone else's spot? I'd get in trouble with the neighbors. You don't have a car now either, Father Rafael replied calmly. Sit down, please, he asked, making himself comfortable on the sofa. It is very important that you listen to me now and understand me correctly. Linda obediently sat down, but he realized from her confused look that he would have to explain his ideas to her in great detail, as long as she didn't understand what had happened and why they were doing this to her. You know, I once read that in ancient Greece there was a curse. Let the children of our enemies live in luxury, he began. Comfort is a good thing, daughter, but only when a man himself, earned it himself. Then he learns to appreciate what he has, because he knows how much work and time it takes to make sure you have a spacious kitchen and a parking lot. While you were young and then in school, I felt it was my duty to support you to the best of my ability. My means are considerable, and you know it. I saw no reason to deny you good living conditions. But now, daughter, you will have the conditions you have provided for yourself. I'm giving you your own place. And believe me, that's a lot, but the rest is up to you. Do you understand me? I'm doing this because I love you and I really want you to become fully independent, to live knowing that you can improve everything yourself, housing conditions, earn money for a car, and not wait for me or my husband to fulfill your wishes. But Daddy, the girl said confusedly, what about me? I have to go to work myself, buy groceries, myself to keep the house clean, cook, wash dishes, watch my clothes. Where am I going to get all this time? You may find it hard to believe now, Rafael smiled. But that's how most people live, Rafael continued. But I'm not most people, Linda exploded. I'm used to something different, and if you want to teach me to be independent, you should have done it earlier. I've always had nannies, housekeepers, cars and proper housing. I could travel, I could study. And now you can do the same. Her father took her hand conciliatingly. Does anyone forbid you? But now you will have to earn money for it yourself. You have a good education, you have your own apartment. You get a job, build a career, and you'll succeed. Not immediately, a little bit, but it will work out. The main thing is not to give up. I don't know, the girl admitted sadly. I didn't see it that way, but of course, I knew that there are people who need to work to live, and I felt so sorry for them. I didn't even think that I too would have to chase for a piece of bread for repairs. I thought I'd have that all by myself. I already have. No, Linda, my father corrected me. It's all there, but I have my own. In your adult life, you will be on your own, and I will always support you, give you advice. Rafael was sure that his daughter would understand him, but Linda was disappointed and angry. When she returned home that day, she went up to her room and didn't come back until the morning. Patrick didn't want to miss that chill of the night. The city called to him with shining signs, children's voices of music from passing cars. It was just a shame there was no one to share these few hours of freedom from the heat of the day with. In the past, you could always take Linda with you, but Linda was gone. She wouldn't be any use, at least not today. She was freaking out, offended, and I didn't want to find out what she was so angry about. Let her cool down first. He liked Linda, and for the future, when his free life was over, he would make her a beautiful proposal, and there was no doubt that she would accept it. After all, who would she find better? They've known each other for a long time, they understand each other, and know almost everything about each other. You couldn't ask for better. But what to do today? Tonight he'll have to find his own company. Just in case, I'll pick up some girl, Patrick promised himself. He liked noise, fun, socializing, and the idea of being alone with his own thoughts never appealed to him. He got lucky almost immediately, didn't even have to pick anyone up. The company had found itself. Patrick was strolling along the boardwalk when he saw Spencer sitting on the summer veranda, sad over a glass. They had once studied together, but after his freshman year, Spencer had decided he couldn't be a marketer and had gone to fulfill his long-held dream of living in the countryside with his grandmother and forgetting about city life. Patrick thought, deep down, that Spencer had gone a little crazy. But that little fact aside, he was a great guy, and Patrick was really glad to have met him. Brother, he shouted and waved both arms. Spencer, you're back in town. Without waiting for an invitation, he plopped down in the empty seat across from his buddy and laughed. Are you still tired of the quiet of the countryside? He flicked the waiter over. 2 guineas for the meeting, and 2 more so you don't have to run back and forth. Spencer didn't seem surprised at Patrick's noisy appearance. What's new? He smiled. Patrick grimaced. Oh, just stuff. I got my diploma. Now my parents are going to be furious with me if I refuse to work for them, hoping only for God's mercy and parental charity. You don't want to work, do you? Spencer raised his light eyebrows. He looked confused. He didn't seem to understand how anyone could not want to work. It's not that Patrick decided to spare his innocence. I just don't know what it's like to get up every day and do the same thing all day long. You work, Patrick said. I do. How do you not get bored? Asking this question, Patrick suddenly realized that his friend's answer was very important to him, and it wasn't about what he was about to hear. The original reason or something was that his mother was a famous woman. It was said that 30 years ago, she was the mistress of a criminal mastermind. He loved the young fool, and even thought of marrying her. but he didn't have time because of her early death. In those days, as Patrick had heard, it was a common thing. But then it turned out that the young bride was a girl with a temper. The rumor of the people said that the girl had managed to take much of what was left after the death of the groom, and there was a lot left. That's what started her endeavors. Whether it was true or not, no one knew for sure. The woman kept silent on the subject, but the owner of the distillery was far from poor, and her only son was to become the heir to a multi-million-dollar fortune, and her son left for the country. That's the story. Patrick gulped down his ice-cold gin and repeated his question. Aren't you tired of working like a damn man? Spencer answered him with his usual serious look. You don't know what to answer. Sometimes you get tired, of course, but in general, no. I don't get bored. I have no monotony. You leave the house in the morning, and there is a new blade of grass or apple trees are blooming. You don't need much. Your soul is simple, Patrick thought, and said to change the subject. Do you remember Aleko, so slender and tall? I do, Spencer smiled. You two were always inseparable. How is she now? Are you still friends? I talked to her today, Patrick said. She said her father bought her a place in the slums and wants her to move there some months. Port herself. No, can you imagine? The old man set her on fire. Spencer shrugged. What's the big deal? She's got a degree. She can make money. What's the problem? What's the problem? Patrick exclaimed. Who did her father earn his money for? There are no pockets in the coffin. So what's he sorry if his daughter, the only one, will take advantage, will live at his pleasure? Dad, Spencer said thoughtfully. No matter how much he earns from his labor, if he went broke tomorrow, he'd never be penniless. You know why? Because he's got offshore accounts, Patrick suggested, feigning naivete. No, of course not. It has nothing to do with that. He just knows how to work, you know, and not just work, but planning, organizing people, setting goals for himself and his team. And he knows how to achieve his goals, how much time and perseverance he needs to put in to expect results. And this skill is invaluable. No amount of parental money can provide it. That's why you decided to make your own money and not take anything from your mother, Patrick suddenly guessed. Spencer smiled. You could say that. The school of life, you know, you can't buy it, and you can't sell it for money. It can only be experienced. I'm going to go. I stopped in town for a while to visit Tom's mom and then back. Hi, Linda. Apparently, from the shock, Linda had not had time to go to bed yet, but had fallen asleep. But she woke up early and felt rested and full of energy. Yesterday was remembered as a bad comedy that she had to watch, but it was almost erased from her memory. It was just a bad joke Dad had made. It was so bad that it took Linda a long time to get over it. But after all, everyone's entitled to make a mistake. It's no big deal. Humming cheerfully, she went down to the living room. Rafael had already eaten breakfast and was finishing his coffee. Good morning, daughter, he smiled. Linda ran up to her father and threw herself on his neck with a joyful laugh. You played me so well yesterday that I almost believed you, Daddy. But honestly, you did go a little overboard. I was scared for a moment, Linda admitted. Rafael, looking at his daughter smiling serenely, didn't know what to say. There was so much calm, unbreakable confidence in her that Daddy would never do that to her. How could I disappoint her? It's going to have to be scary now, the man sternly ordered himself. Unless, of course, you do not want your only daughter to grow up helpless and useless dependent. And also if you want to die peacefully, knowing that my daughter will cope in any case, will get out of it, even if all her inheritance turns to dust. I wasn't playing a trick on you, Linda, he said. I'm sorry, and try to understand. I want you to become your own person. I want you to learn to succeed with your own work, your own brains, your own abilities, not mine. Honey, I want you to stand on your own 2 feet. Daddy, don't interrupt me, Linda interrupted him. You may not believe me now, but someday you'll realize that your independence is the most exciting, the best adventure you've ever had. Bye, replied the daughter glumly. The only thing that has happened to me is that you are depriving me of everything that I'm yours to, that you yourself have accustomed me to since I was a child. If you wanted me to be independent, you should have dressed me in rags, fed me stale bread, or better yet, you should have put me in an orphanage so that I would not be spoiled and rely only on myself. I took care of you, repeated my father, as a parent should. But let me remind you, Linda, I'm only obligated to support you until you can earn a living on your own. You're an adult, you have a diploma. All you have to do is get a job and start your working life. And you think I should be happy about that? Linda was indignant. Who does that to children? Dad, first you give them all the conditions for a carefree life, and then you take it all away. Go and live on what you earn. Your peers, Rafael said, and often those younger than you, leave their hometown to go to school, or they go to work in other places, and there's no one there, believe me, waiting for them. They learn to make it on their own, without help. But I'm not them. Daddy, Linda almost cried. Don't you understand? That I'm not going to live in a one-room apartment, and I'm not going to run around interviewing. looking for some pathetic job, bending my back for food, and waiting to be appreciated. You called me your princess, so please make sure I have the right living conditions. And yes, don't look at me like that. I'm a human being, after all. I am your daughter. You treat me like what? Like what? Father asked quickly. Haven't you ever been outside? Haven't you seen all those people rushing about their business, going to the grocery store and holding the hands of their children? They have jobs, their own important things to do, their own lives that they are responsible for. They know that if they don't make money today, they will have nothing tomorrow to buy food, clothes, or even pay for transportation. And so they are busy. They have things to do, they are looking for ways to improve their lives. Yes, but only because they don't have a choice, Linda said. Me and people like me, we do. Can we do nothing? Rafael asked. I'll tell you something, daughter. Someone once asked me how much money I would need if I didn't have to work anymore. And you know what? I realized that I'll always work, no matter what, as long as I can, because I love what I do. Does that give you any ideas? No, the daughter replied grimly. No, it doesn't. All right. Let me give you a hint. Who's the one who's been hanging around all day doing nothing? I'll tell you. Marginalized, enslaved addicts, alcoholics, drug addicts, all what they call the bottom of society. In your youth slang, those who have enough money, Rafael continued, and not their own money, but just someone to support them. They get up in the morning, have breakfast in a cafe, go shopping, have lunch in a restaurant. In the evening, they discuss the latest gossip in a circle of the same. Is this what life is worth living for? An aimless, pointless existence. Is that what you think we should strive for? In my opinion, Linda said, it's the ability to enjoy life. It's the ability not to be tied to a workplace, a paycheck and an apartment. It's freedom from his aspirations, his favorite thing to do, his accomplishments. Linda, he shook his head. You're still an inexperienced person, a millionaire who gave up everything and went to live in the mountains, and a man who has never done anything are not the same. They have different reasons for living that way. One has tested himself in business, knows what he is capable of, and just decided to take a vacation. The other is just a lazy bum. And you reproach me for treating you like a person who is capable of leading a normal life. Am I capable? Linda asked defiantly. Then prove it. Not to me, prove it to yourself. And I've blocked all your cards except for one amount. You'll have enough for a month until you get a job. Now start packing and remember, your new apartment won't hold much. Only take the essentials. I'm not going anywhere, Daddy. The tears in the girl's eyes dried, and her face suddenly became hard. That's enough. I'm fed up with your righteous attitude. I have my own point of view on everything that's going on here now. If you want, I'll give it to you. Interested? Then look, you're just tired of having to take care of someone. You feel bad about spending money on me, and you just want to live for yourself. But here's the rub. You're embarrassed to just kick me out of the house. So you make up all sorts of soul-saving heresies, put some clever considerations under your very trivial selfishness. That's a good one, Father whistled. Are you sure it's me who's selfish and not you? Wouldn't it be easier for me to marry you off, throw in a monthly allowance and forget you ever existed? That would be too costly. Dad, Tina smiled venomously. Finding me a fiancé and paying my allowance would be too expensive. It would be easier to talk nonsense about the benefits of poverty and righteous labor for a bowl of chowder, but you can't do that trick. I'm not going anywhere. Understand? And you're not kicking me out. I promise I'll cause a media scandal that'll ruin your business reputation. Linda, you know how the tabloids work. They don't care where the truth is. All they want is the goddamn scoop, and I'd be more than happy to give it to them. Can you imagine the uproar if they told them that a millionaire had left his own daughter destitute on a whim? How everyone around will groan? The daughter is cold, said Rafael. Well, if you want to make a scandal, I can probably help you with that. Tell the press that your father exiled you to a remote village, that you live in a shanty town, and that you plow your own vegetable garden. And don't forget to offer to take pictures. Good quality pictures that show your face, your garden, and your beds. That's a great idea, Daddy, my daughter said snidely. Can you come up with a great PR campaign? Of course I can. Especially for a daughter. You don't even have to lie, because it's the truth. I'll take you to the village tonight. I have an old house there, my aunt's inheritance. You'll live in nature. You'll think about the meaning of life, and know that my men will be there every day with food. Don't expect to run away. Go pack your things. I'm not going, Linda said, arms crossed over her chest. I'm going to live here. No, you won't, Dad said. You made me remind you that this is my home, and everything here, as well as everything you use, belongs to me. paid for by me and earned by me. That's why I'm going, shouted the girl hysterically. I'm going to pack. Take me to your backwoods, but then don't ever come. Don't call me at all. Forget that you have a daughter. She, sobbing, rushed up the stairs to her room, and Rafael sank tiredly into a chair. What had they come to? How did this happen? Linda's yelling, threatening, ready to lash out at him with her fists. He was angry with her. But at the same time his heart was bleeding at the thought that now he'd have to keep his promise, to take the girl out into the wilderness, to get her to come to her senses. I'm ready, Linda said, tossing her travel bag to the floor. Good, her father said, getting up. Let's go then. Linda had never been to a village, except for a tiny hamlet in the Alps, where everything was open, orderly, beautiful. The stores were open, the internet was excellent, and even medical care was readily available. People lived in nice cottages, where the rooms had new furniture and cozy fireplaces, and the villagers themselves wore neat clothes and did not forget about manicures. Alpine villages of this type no one told. They lived off their very expensive ski resorts. Yes, and most of the cottages were rented out to tourists, which the spoiled girl didn't want to know about, and that must be why the village her father brought her to seemed like a set from a horror movie. There were bad roads, unkept houses, and gnarled fences. There were dogs barking, cows mooing, and geese marching along the road. Rafael had to slow down to let the feathered villagers cross the road. I hate you, Papa, said the girl, closing her eyes. You're worse than I thought. You've put me in this nightmare, which is even worse than yesterday's. You're not a father, you're a pervert. Now, Dad said as he stopped the car, you hate me even more. Here we go. Get out of the car and look at your new home. The house behind the fence was hard to see. The man-sized weeds were in the way. So come on, Rafael called, and stepped fearlessly through the thicket. Grab your bag and follow me. Linda followed him silently. The house was very small, darkened and dusty, with only one room. It smelled of mold, old things, and dust. Welcome home, daughter, the father said nonchalantly, and in anticipation of your questions. No, this is not a joke. Have a nice stay. Linda, I wish you success in your new life. Linda watched her father walk out of the house and back through the huge weeds to the car. It was hard to believe her eyes, her dad, so understanding, so always generous to her. He had left her alone to survive in some wreck. It was impossible, unthinkable. But it had happened. Linda walked over to the old table, covered with numerous knife marks, and ran her palm over it. The dust was thick and sticky, as if it had been there for many, many years. The wooden stool under the table looked very old too, but a little cleaner. Sure, the light-colored jeans were over now, but did it really matter now? Linda sat down and looked longingly into the dark, dirty room. This was where she would have to live now, amidst the dust, the dirt, the cobwebs, the stench, and the dampness. For a good minute she thought about calling her father, crying into the receiver, saying that she had realized everything and was ready to move to the city apartment, which yesterday had seemed the norm to her, and today seemed almost paradise. I won't call, she promised herself grimly. I'll chew the earth, but I won't call. But don't let her think I'm such a wuss. Linda unzipped her travel bag and pulled out a black tracksuit. If she was going to get dirty, she'd better change into something that wasn't scary. There was a bucket under the table and an old broom in the corner. We're getting along, the girl grinned. Now let's find a rag. Having made her way through the medieval jungle, Linda went out of the gate, and to her great joy she found a spring right next to the house. The water was scalding cold, but in this terrible heat it was even pleasant. Linda returned to the house with a bucket full of water, and, turning on the flashlight in her phone, examined the house more carefully. In the hay was an ancient kitchen cupboard, filled with miscellaneous utensils and old towels. Linda liked the towels, especially they came in handy. She tore up the oldest towel with holes in it and started cleaning immediately. It took an hour to clean the window, but the room brightened up. Hey, someone called out as Linda stepped out onto the porch to dump out the dirty water. Who are you? Through the weeds, someone was walking toward her. The person's step was heavy, confident. Who are you? At last her first guest appeared in front of Linda, a round and perky grandmother, who, although leaning on a cane, clearly did not need it. My name is Linda, the girl introduced herself, and wiping her palms on her pants, extended her hand to the old woman. I saw someone doing something, and I thought I'd take a look, Helen said, looking at Linda. Grandma Helen, that's where I live. She pointed her cane in the right direction. Right behind the fence. All right, what'll it be? Well, come on in like a neighbor. You got everything. Linda laughed. I don't have anything. Nothing at all. I don't even know if there's electricity. The store is closed today, said Grandma Helen. They've gone into town for supplies. How could there not be electricity? Wait a minute. I'll be right back." And the neighbor, breaking weeds with a stick, went to the gate. Linda splashed out the water and had time to draw more when Grandma Helen returned, pushing an old baby carriage loaded to the area. "Here," she said proudly, stopping the stroller just off the porch. "I found some candles for you, until you buy light bulbs, matches, a box, and a bar of soap. It'll make cleaning easier. I brought you some more bedding. The mattress is old, but it's good. A pillow, sheets, and 2 pieces. You lie on one and sleep in the other." "Well, it's so hot," Helen remarked, and smiled slyly, then slipped her hand into her apron pocket. "First things first, what's this?" "Good heavens," laughed the girl. On the palm of the old woman's hand sat a tiny red and white striped kitten, looking around fearfully. "When you move into a house, the first thing you should do is to let the cat in," said Grandma Helen sternly. "It will bring good luck and get along with the housekeeper, and you will be a friend. Here, and look over there, in the stroller. I've packed you some food." "I'll go now," she said. "Grandma Helen," Linda called out to her. "What about the baby carriage?" "I'll come tomorrow," the neighbor waved her hand. "We'll go to the store together, and I'll show you where it is." Linda spent the rest of the evening cleaning and tidying up her new home. The kitten, which turned out to be a playful and curious girl. The girl named Lucy and gave her a place next to the bed. To make a cozy bed for the animal, she had to sacrifice her own sweater. Linda had bought this sweater in Los Angeles by chance at a sale and loved it for its softness and warmth. But Lucy was so happy to snuggle into her new home that it was silly to feel sorry for the thing. It was not until nightfall that Linda sat down to supper. In the basket were a liter jar of excellent sour cream, a few tomatoes and cucumbers, a large piece of bread, a bottle of cherry morsels, and a can of homemade stew. The neighbor had not forgotten to add a box of salt to everything. "Well, it's a royal dinner tonight," Linda said, placing a saucer of sour cream in front of the kitten. Some dishes and cutlery were in the same cupboard in the hay. However, both of them had darkened over time, and the girl had to do a lot of cleaning at first. But now she had a few plates, forks, spoons, and a large kitchen knife that inspired both respect and apprehension. A candle had been placed on a saucer, and the table was now well lit. Linda looked around the room again, but this time with pleasure and a little pride in herself. The floors had been cleaned. There were no more cobwebs in the corners, and the walls, table and stool could be touched without fear of getting dirty. The room looked much more cheerful than before. When she went to bed, she made a list of things to do tomorrow. Go to the village store, see what they were selling, and buy some food. She had to get some light bulbs, and she also had to get rid of the weeds in the yard and think about curtains. And of course, buy at least a small electric stove. The fear of the unknown no longer plagued Linda, at least for the near future. She had enough to worry about. Her whole past life as a spoiled little daddy's girl suddenly seemed like a long-forgotten funny dream. Lucy lay quietly in her soft woolen nest. It was like a lullaby. She closed her eyes and fell asleep at once. "Love is a bloody thing," Rafael sighed bitterly. "Honestly, Max, I look at you and envy you. You've always lived for yourself. No wife, no children, but freedom." "You are a fool, hapless," said the friend. "Who needs it, such freedom? You've got a girl growing, and I've only got that thing on the windowsill." And he pointed to a flowering cactus in a pot. "So much for freedom. You got something to be jealous of." Rafael couldn't think of anything to say. After he'd taken his daughter to the wilderness, he couldn't bring himself to go to work, and the thought of going home made it almost physically painful to go back to the place where everything reminded him of Callie. No, not now. Then he tried to call Nadia, his new lover, but he hung up before she could answer. Nadia, what does she know? She's 35. Her whole range of interests is where to have fun. She's a former model who never found herself, so she chose a weird profession called socialite. What Chelsea does is unclear. Present at all the important events. Rafael himself did not like such outings, but sometimes it was necessary. Helen was the perfect companion for the occasion, always cheerful, beautiful, in the most fashionable clothes. She wasn't much to talk about, but that wasn't such a serious disadvantage if you didn't plan a serious relationship, and Helen was satisfied with everything. Rafael paid for all her whims, and did not bother her with jealousy scenes. On the contrary, he urged her to think about a family. Helen, as was her habit, laughed and turned the conversation to another, more interesting topic. You can't go to her with your pain. She wasn't made for that. And so Rafael, exhausted by worries, went to his school friend Max. When he got there, he realized he'd done the right thing. Memory is a great thing. in the cramped apartment of a former classmate was not designer repair. There were no delicacies in the refrigerator, and a woolen rug hung on the wall almost defiantly. Everyone makes such a mockery of wall-to-wall carpets nowadays that your interior looks rebellious, Rafael laughed. Max said philosophically that he didn't care what anyone else thought. The rug suited him, and it would stay there until he got tired of it. All right, he said. This isn't about my rug. You have black eyes. And it turned out that Max had barely looked at him, but it seemed that he had seen everything, noticed everything, and Rafael tried to tell everything at once, stumbling, jumping from topic to topic, but he hoped Max would understand, or at least pretend to understand something of their conversation. He sat his friend down at the table and took out a dusty bottle of moonshine from the refrigerator. Don't give me any, I don't drink, Rafael grumbled. Are you drinking today? Max declared unquestioningly, and poured the drink as if it were medicine. But surprisingly, he was right. Not that the anxiety and pain had evaporated, but somehow it had dulled, and he had loosened his tongue, which was especially important. Everyone needs to talk sometimes. But why do you suffer so much? Rafael persuaded his friend. Max, you're sitting there, gnawing at yourself. And why? The girl is an adult. She's not 2 years old, not 3. But let her sit in the village for a week. Then take her out of here. It's no big deal. Did you leave her in the woods to be eaten by wolves? No. There's a house there. And people are nearby. Normal people live in the village. They'll give you a hint. Look after her. Where are you from? You haven't forgotten. Not yet. So who am I? Rafael objected. I was born and grew up in the village. This peasant life is not strange to me. For me, it was a normal life. But Tina had only seen the countryside and the mountains. So don't compare. She'll run around like a fool, looking for coffee shops with outlets to charge her iPhone from the fancy salon. So what is she? Max was instantly incensed. She got used to the salons, and her iPhone ran out of battery. What a grief. Kind people, take her to the city. Let her better continue to be idle, and apologize to her, so that you, her own father, who has never spared anything for her, and continue to be rude with all the consequences. And then you'll be able to roll around like a cheese and butter, at your expense, of course. What you've lived your life, you insolent parasite. Is that what you want for your daughter? I'm afraid for her, Max the man admitted. I'm afraid. She'll go to bed alone in an empty house and hear the mice scrabbling in the cellar. And when she wakes up in the night, she'll be scared half to death. Ugh, the mice are underground. If you want to know, a mouse in the cellar is nothing, not a bear in the garden. If it gets scared, it'll call you. And you're still talking nonsense to me. It won't go to waste. Your blood, it won't do anything to her. Not mine, Rafael said sadly, that they, Max, are busy drinking another batch of alcohol. I didn't immediately realize what my friend was saying. The blood is not mine. Linda is not my kin. That's the way it is, Rafael said. That's a twist. You knew? I didn't know it myself. Then I had to take a DNA test. You know, that's when it all came out. It didn't get easier until 5 years later. Well, Max stopped him. Tell me in a human way. How did it start? Why did you suddenly run to the tests? It's not for nothing. Where did the wood come from? Not for nothing, agreed Rafael. There was when Chelsea died, my wife. She was my secretary first, you know. I didn't look her in the face for 6 months. She was always so shy, so unobtrusive. Then one day I bumped into her on the way to the office, and suddenly I saw a beautiful girl. Her eyes are so deep and calm. I've only seen such a thing on Lake Baikal. When the weather is good, you sit there and look. The same silence and tranquility. That's when I fell in love with her. But we got married. Everything was fine. The same peace and quiet, the same tranquility. How long did you live? We didn't have a son right away. I don't remember Chelsea ever getting angry or raising her voice. She was always so quiet, so humble. I used to think maybe I should get another wife. You know, someone of her stature, right? My status. I was thinking abstractly, not concretely, because I loved Chelsea. She was so unassuming, so quiet, so inconspicuous. Even her clothes were discreet, gray or brown, so as not to stand out, I guess. Or maybe it was just her taste. Anyway, I wouldn't have thought of anything like that. So, is my Chelsea out with someone? What happened to her being gone? Some guy showed up at my door. I don't know who he was, but he showed up demanding money or he'd take me to court. What for? I'm gonna take your baby away from you. He said my Linda's my daughter and you're just a cuckold husband. I found out about him later, Rafael continued. He and Chelsea and the neighbors had been friends since they were kids. They went to school together, but he was always a bully, always doing things, and girls love that kind of guy, the D'Artagnan. Anyway, that's when they started having an affair right after school. He, the asshole, decided to go into business. But business as he understood it, he extorted money in his neighborhood and took the goods to the point. There were a lot of such bargains in the central markets back then. He was doing this and that, and then he had a disagreement with the fence sellers. The latter started to pay him little, like there was no money, only losses. So this businessman watched gangster shows and sent thugs to smash up the fence. Barely survived. Anyway, they shut that gangster down. Chelsea, dumbass, waited for him, sent him packages. Then he got out. But Chelsea was already a nice lady with me. But I guess old love just wouldn't let go. And you're not angry with her at all. Max was surprised. She deceived you, it turns out. I didn't know about it, Rafael said simply. And when I found out she wasn't alive anymore, what am I supposed to do? Climb the wall because of that. What about the test? Max kept up. That's when I took it. The asshole wasn't lying about Linda being my daughter, was he? It didn't change anything, though. He didn't get his money's worth. I didn't pay him anything. In fact, I made sure he never came to town again. You what? Max was stunned. Did you do that to him? Come on. I'm not going to get my hands dirty. I just asked my friends to check his accounts, and there was a lot of interesting things there. I told him he had 24 hours to disappear from the city. If he didn't, he'd go to jail. So he took off. You raised her like your own, didn't you? Max asked. Rafael grinned. And I raised her. I thought then that if I loved her, I would raise her as my own. So why give up on her because of such nonsense? So what if she's not my blood, but she's mine for life? Now, I don't know, said Max. Linda had been in the village for a week. At first it seemed to her that it was hopeless and absolutely impossible to survive here. Then she realized that if she kept her wits about her and didn't panic, she should survive. By the beginning of the next week, Linda had decided that she liked life in the village. She had never had to make her own decisions before. Sure, she had chosen her outfits, her room furnishings, the color and make of her car, but it was all based on her personal preferences alone. And by and large, those decisions didn't affect anything. She remembered well the silly stories about how she had suddenly wanted a cream-colored car to the point of insanity. When she had seen the right shade at a car dealership, she had bought the car immediately, without thinking twice, and found out that the shade is a little different from the desired one. The girl was terribly upset, but her father only smiled and said, "But I like this shade. Let me take this car, and you choose another now." These whims of hers seemed so far away and terribly silly. She'd found the wrong shade to keep her up at night. Now Linda had to organize the house, buy the necessary things, take care of the little kitten. Her father's men, if they came, were nowhere to be seen, and the money in the card was melting away. However, Rafael realized that work in the village girl marketer will not find a job, and therefore every day transferred to his daughter a little money, just a little. But Linda forbade herself to ask Rafael for help and was grateful for this daily allowance. She already had curtains, kitchen towels, and new linens in her cabin. For inexpensive but new cups and spoons, she had to make a short trip to town. There, Linda bought a kettle and a camp stove for cooking. She also made a friend, Grandma Helen, her kind-hearted neighbor. As it turned out later, lived not alone, but with her grandson Spencer. After the first night in her new home, Linda went out into the yard and looked in disgust at the giant weeds. A middle-of-the-road jungle brook muttered. She stepped closer, grabbed the nearest stalk with her hands, and pulled it out of the ground. "Well, that's a start," she whispered, and picked up the next one. Lucy watched her hostess curiously, sitting on the porch while she worked in this manner. The girl had succeeded in clearing a small patch of ground by noon, and that's when her neighbor appeared. "I brought a hoe," he said, "and I see you all with bare hands. By nightfall your hands will be sore, and you're going nowhere fast." Linda blew her bangs out of her eyes and turned to her neighbor. "Thank you," she said, accepting the tool, "and return it to whom?" But the guy didn't answer. He looked at the girl and smiled with his mouth full. "Linda," he said, "and Patrick said you lived in the city." "Patrick's a crackpot," she said sharply and stammered, "and you and I know each other. I think I've definitely seen you somewhere." "We went to school together," Spencer reminded her, not offended at all. "Freshman year. Spencer Vasiliev?" "I remember now." Spencer, Linda's eyes widened in amazement. "And you? How come? It turns out you're here. Were you Exile too?" "Oh, sorry, I'm in voluntary exile," he laughed. "Why, I like it here very much. I live, I work." "You work?" Linda asked, surprised. "I drive a tractor." Well, I'm looking to see how you're settling in. Let me give you a hand. The two of them quickly cleared the ground in front of the house. We'll clear the ground behind the house tomorrow, Linda suggested. As she sat down on the porch, she said, "Sit down, Spencer, and tell me why you dropped out of school. Why did you move here?" "I will," Spencer agreed, sitting down next to her. "You remember that my mom's, I know. Yeah, I know, she interrupted impatiently. Who doesn't know her? But I never thought about anything he said. School. Well, everyone studies at school, and immediately after, the institute. Marketing is a promising good thing, Spencer said. I still think so, but I'm stuck in school. It seems like I'm studying. And then I came here somehow. But every once in a while, I'd come up here to help my grandmother. My mom wanted to take her to the city, but my grandmother is as stubborn as they come. So I came here to help an elderly person because of her age. And once I came, twice I came. And then somehow I started to think. Here I am studying marketing. I will work in the city, of course, like everyone else. Some of them are studying law. Some of them are studying advertising. Some of them are studying computers, writing programs, you know? Is that bad? Tina wondered. No. It's good. Spencer picked up a blade of grass and put it in his mouth, twirled it in his teeth, and continued. But it turns out that we're all going to develop the urban areas, and the villages are left to fend for themselves. There is nothing here, no work, no development. Agriculture is falling apart. There are few farms, and it turns out that in another 30 years, but what 30? In 10, maximum 15 years, there will be a huge amount of land that no one will need. Poor, uncultivated, undeveloped, everything will be overgrown with forest, and the forest will be sold. And what? Only stumps will be left. So I decided that I should be more farsighted, work on the land, pull the village out of the swamp, and then the marketers and advertisers will reach here. The main thing is to have a place to reach. And this means that the sales market will expand. After all, the cities have everything. There is an oversaturation of goods and services, and it turns out that there are a lot of businesses instantly closed down, notwithstanding the competition. And why? Because it's cramped. When all together in one commercial space crowded, and here there will be a new field of activity, a new market. But first this market must be created. Do you understand? No, Linda was honest. How are you going to create a market here if the whole village has 30 people? We have one store for the whole village. Why do you think that is? Spencer smiled. Because one store is enough for 30 people. Open 3 more stores and you're guaranteed to get it sorted out, said Spencer. Because even if you had 10 people coming in, you wouldn't recoup the cost of your purchases. Can you compete? It's totally possible. But let's say you've done it and you've gotten everyone to come to you and you're cool and 2 of your competitors have closed. What do you end up with? The same one store for the whole village because one is enough. And if not 30 people live here in the village permanently, but 300, you just need to create conditions for people, give them houses, give them work. And how are you going to do it? The girl asked. This Spencer winked at her. It's a secret for now. Linda looked at her neighbor and admired him involuntarily. You know, Spencer, she said, I'm listening to you, and I can see how interested you are. Your eyes are burning, you're on fire, and I'm kind of jealous. I guess I've never seen that before. You, Spencer smiled. Don't be jealous. Go ahead, plug in. You came here. What were your first thoughts? What did you think of first? Well, the girl thought about the fact that it's unclear how it's possible to live here. And then? Well, I started cleaning, washing everything. And your grandmother, Grandma Helen, helped me a lot and even brought me some food from the bedroom. I worked till evening, and then we ate and went to bed. And when I fell asleep, I started to think about what else I should do. So I started to settle in, summarize the neighbor. So it is possible to live here, it turned out. It turns out that you can. Nodded the girl. That's it. And where you can live well. It just takes effort. You see, it's simple. He got up easily. Let's go home. We'll continue with Ashley in the morning. Good night. Night. 2 months later, Patrick was ready to walk out with homesickness. If he had known that getting his diploma would open the door to such a bleak existence, he would have preferred to remain a perpetual student. The fun life was over, and now his friends, who yesterday were still unemployed dummies, were definitely going crazy, all rushed to look for work. They were going from one interview to another, endlessly monitoring vacancies, and some of them even went to other cities because they were given jobs there. Walking around the city at night and sitting in cozy cafes was no longer of interest to anyone. I have a job interview in the morning, some said. I have to work tomorrow, said others. I've already forgotten when I last slept, complained others. These were the excuses now given by their favorite buddies. For some reason, Patrick's father was completely on their side. They, unlike you, are not talkers, he said sternly once, when his son wanted to complain to him about his current lonely life. Guys want to work, to develop. You should take an example from them. And what about me? Patrick sobbed. You know I have personal drama. My fiancée dumped me. My fiancée-to-be. If you mean Linda, his father replied, then dumping you was the best decision she ever made. You've got nothing but fun on your mind. What kind of family can you have? Well, I was planning on getting a job, just later. And why would I be in a hurry? Don't I have any money? Yes, you do. Unfortunately, Rafael was right to send his daughter off to adulthood. But I can't send you away. You don't know anything. You've only learned at Linda's expense. Who gave you notes? Who gave you advice on exams? Patrick didn't want to continue the conversation. His father didn't understand him, and he never missed a chance to reproach his son for laziness. And now his father and his friends, no one supported him. No one wanted to understand a very simple thing. Life should be enjoyed, especially if there are opportunities for it. It seemed to Patrick that he was the only one who had remained the same, while everyone else had somehow aged very quickly and unexpectedly. All day long he drove aimlessly through the streets, stopping for a bite to eat at a restaurant. And then the driving started again, to the stores, to distant places. He managed to go to the islands, but returned after a few days. Tropical homesickness was no better than usual. He tried volunteering at a shelter for homeless animals, but on his first day, a big dog caught in a dumpster bared its teeth and growled at him. Patrick immediately imagined the consequences of being bitten by a dog that could be sick with anything, and his desire to volunteer vanished. For another week he lay around all day and night, watching all the new movies, and books bored him so much that he fell asleep after the first 2 pages. His father advised him to get a job in his tactless manner. It would keep his head busy, he said. Desperate, Patrick showed up for a couple of interviews. At the first, when he learned that he had no work experience, he was turned down. At the second, he was welcomed with open arms. But after hearing the amount of his future earnings, Patrick himself hurried to leave the hospitable office. One day he had the fantasy of visiting Spencer, who lived in the village, and Patrick, tired of idleness, decided to fulfill it immediately. He found the journey tedious and insanely long, although most likely it was because Patrick, who was not accustomed to driving in the neighborhood, got lost in the village a couple of times. He didn't leave until the very evening, but he saw his buddy almost immediately. Spencer was walking from the bus stop, heavy travel bags in each hand. Need a ride? Patrick called out to him, and, imitating his southern accent, added, Get in, dear, I'll give you a ride. It's cheap. Hey, Patrick, Spencer threw both of his creepy bags in the back seat and sat in the front. What are you doing here? Are you visiting us? The city's sad and depressing. No one to hang out with. Everyone's got work. They've got great things to do. I remembered I haven't seen you for a long time. I called your mother. She gave me her address. What's up? How's life in the countryside treating you? Patrick asked, trying to act carefree. And what do you have in your bags? New fertilizers, Patrick asked. How's it going? Spencer answered carefully. In the bags, all sorts of things. Went to town today. What I took for my grandmother. What I took for myself. I got some for Linda, too. Who? Patrick stopped abruptly in surprise and stared into his friend's serene face. What, she's here too? What was she doing here? Honestly, he smiled. I never asked her that. She said she came to live here. She came, so live. What's the problem? We're neighbors. You stopped just in time. By the way, Spencer continued. There's my house, and Lindine's next door. Spencer called out a cheerful girl's voice. There's the landlady. Patrick noticed. Linda stood leaning on the fence and smiled at her neighbor. At her feet, a well-fed gray puppy was spinning in a furry ball. Look who's been thrown, she said, taking the puppy in her arms. He was sitting by the gate, whimpering. I felt sorry for him. I decided to let him keep watch. You were right, Spencer said. I didn't come alone. Look who's here. Patrick got out of the car reluctantly. Oh, who told Spencer to speak his mind? If he'd kept his mouth shut, Patrick would have driven back to town. That's exactly what he wanted to do. Because if the meeting with his friend hadn't surprised him, seeing Linda, so tanned, with her hair sloppy and on the back of her head, was somehow unpleasant. Did she really live here, too, in this little house, in the middle of the road? in the middle of the beds, with some stray puppies. "Good evening, Patrick," Linda said coldly. "Sorry, I've got a lot to do." Spencer grabbed the bags from the back seat and dragged them into the house. Patrick noticed that as he passed Linda, Spencer rubbed his forehead against her shoulder. What the hell was that about? Not only had his sophisticated friend decided to turn into a country girl, but they were having an affair. Spencer's half crazy. Linda, he was determined to find out what was going on. "What are you doing here?" Patrick pointed at the house. "You live in this shack." "Well, yes," Linda replied, as if she saw nothing wrong with that. "This is my house, I live here. And the barn isn't here, by the way. It's behind the house. You can't see it from here." Patrick, shocked, was silent. He took the girl's hand, noting the absence of manicure, dark streaks of earth under her fingernails. The skin itself was rougher both to look at and to touch. "Put some cream on your hands," he said. "And dirt under your fingernails is not dirt." Linda hid both hands behind her back. "So let's earth, you fool. A lot of what you're used to seeing on the table grows out of the ground. It's not dirt." "Did your daddy bake you here?" "Yes," Patrick asked, looking over the girl's shoulder at the house. "None of your business." "Why not? We used to be friends. And now I see you've stooped to your lowest ebb, and you've found yourself a boyfriend just like her. It's embarrassing to look at you." "Don't look at me," she said. "I didn't ask you to come here. So start your cart and get out of here. I'm fine here. Understand? Without you and all that comes with you." She petted the puppy, made him comfortable, and walked briskly back to the house without looking back. Patrick followed Linda's gaze until she disappeared into the house. "This is crazy." "Okay, Spencer," he was always weird, but Linda was a normal girl, wasn't she? She lived like a human being. How do we get her out of here now? Patrick thought as he stood by the car, wondering how to help his missing friend. He hadn't left yet. Spencer walked out of the house and approached his buddy. "Linda didn't seem too happy to see you. Are you two in a fight or something?" "Women," Patrick smiled sourly. "What's going on with you and her? Did I get that right?" "Right," Spencer said, a little embarrassed. "I always thought she was like that." Wind in her head. "But once she got here, I realized, no, she's a good girl. We thought we'd be married in a year, but we're going to have to do it sooner." "We have an emergency now," Linda said. "What kind of emergency?" Patrick asked with tight lips. "Are you expecting a baby? Just like that?" Suddenly he shouted. "Screw both of you. Crazy, crazy people, both of you, burying yourselves alive. Don't think about anything. You'll breed poverty and you'll sit up to your necks in mud. Country lunatics." He got into the car, and in a minute the dust alone was a reminder of Patrick's visit. "Are you coming to dinner?" "I've already set the table," Linda called out. At the first hour of the morning, a furious Patrick burst into Linda's father's house and immediately threw a tantrum. "Have you no conscience? How? How can you do this to your own daughter? You're not a human being, you're a monster. Your own daughter." "Don't be crazy," Rafael said sharply, something I cannot make out. "Speak clearly." "You killed her," Patrick shouted. "You have no heart. You put Linda in a hole where a normal person can't live." "I lived peacefully," said Rafael. "And what are you, a normal person? Who would send his daughter to such a swamp? But rejoice, now she's got a boyfriend and a granddaughter, and she'll give you a granddaughter soon." "Speak normally. What boyfriend? What grandchild? How do you know?" "I've been there," Patrick admitted. "I saw everything with my own eyes. Come and see for yourself what you've done to your daughter. It's painful to watch." He looked up at Rafael with tired eyes. "I wanted to marry her myself. I thought we'd go out while we were young, enjoy life and freedom, and then by the time we were 30 we could get married, and she and I would live amicably. And you, what can I say to you?" He waved his hand and left the apartment. Rafael was clearly not the kind of man who cared about children. Why try to explain anything to him? Still, it's a shame. So much for Spencer keeping his fiancée safe. That agriculturalist must be out of his mind. He took a girl away from me. What good would she be with him? I mean, what kind of happiness is there in this backwater anyway? Oh, Linda, Linda, Linda. Linda's cell phone didn't answer. Rafael dialed his daughter's number for the 5th time this morning, whether it was something wrong with the connection or just that Linda didn't want to talk to him. After lunch, he went to the village himself. Whatever that bum Patrick had said, he was absolutely right about one thing. It was time for him to visit his daughter and to find out what was going on. Some strange suitors, some grandchildren, maybe the kids imagining things. But it wouldn't hurt to check. He found his daughter at home. Linda had just stepped out on the porch and called for someone. A couple of seconds later, a puppy ran out from around the corner, clumsily tumbling over, and barked happily when he saw his mistress. "Hello," Linda said, "Rafael." The girl blossomed when she saw her father. "Papa, I'm so glad you came to see me. I'm so glad. Well, I realized that you were right about everything. I'm sorry I didn't understand you before, that I was rude. Let's go inside. I'll show you everything." "Wait, daughter," he held her hand. "I'm glad you understand everything. But I didn't come to see you." "Not to me," she was surprised. "Not to you," he hastened to add a clarification. "I came for you. It's time for you to go back. Come on, I'll help you pack your things." "No, Daddy," his daughter stopped him. "I'm not going to the city. I'm fine here. Especially since I'm getting married soon. I want to live on my own. Daddy, I don't want to go back." A blond boy came rushing toward the house. "I won't be long. I'm feeding the animals," he said. There was something very familiar about the young man's features. He reminded him of someone, but Rafael couldn't remember who. "Hello, I'm Charlie," smiled at Linda's father. "My name is Spencer Madison," he introduced himself and smiled. His smile made Rafael uncomfortable. Who did this guy look like? "This is my fiancé," Linda said. "He lives next door and works as a tractor driver." "Glad to meet you." "Let's go inside," Spencer said. "Today is a happy day. My mom was going to come to visit. Let's all get acquainted." Rafael, without saying a word, went into the room after his daughter and her fiancé. The house was tidy. Linda had cleaned the floor, ceiling, and walls, and the windows were covered with white curtains with blue and red flowers. There was a nice carpet on the floor, and the sleeping place was separated from the rest of the area by a curtain. On the set table were okrushka, fresh bread, a carton of milk, sliced cheeses, meat, and in wicker vases there was fruit. What can I say? The daughter has become a real hostess. And this is just a couple of months. "Sit down, Daddy," invited Linda. "Yes, sit down," her fiancé seconded her. "Let's have lunch together." "A tractor driver," said Rafael gloomily. "A tractor driver who wants to marry my daughter. Well, tell me about yourself. What do you do for a living? How do you expect to support your family?" "Don't worry," Spencer said defiantly. "Yes, I have a simple profession, but we live together." "Do you know how she used to live?" Rafael continued his interrogation. "He knows everything, Papa," answered the daughter for the groom. "If you came here to fight, you shouldn't have introduced me to Spencer." In the midst of the argument, a tall, surprisingly slender, stature-like, beautiful woman entered the house. Rafael froze in place, finally realizing who the tractor driver reminded him of. Jody Madison's face had been on the front page of the news for 6 months. There was a lot of talk about the fact that she became interested in agriculture, invested in the purchase of equipment for villages, somewhere even opened a library. "So this is your son?" Rafael asked the woman in a daze. "I thought he was a tractor driver." "I have a son." Jody laughed and patted Spencer's blonde hair. "Just like her own, you see how it is. We go from village to village. Spencer gave me his ideas too. We've got to revitalize the village. You're our greats. Dad, I've read a lot about you." "Not interested in me," Rafa said. He suddenly found it very difficult to speak. Everything he could and wanted to say seemed so meaningless, so stupid. Jody was standing in front of him with his son, the same Jody who had been the subject of the most incredible rumors, and he felt it didn't matter, because the woman of his dreams was in front of him. A warm evening had descended on the village. The first stars were lighting up. The conversations in Linda's house were still going on. Spencer suggested they go out for some fresh air, and the others gladly supported his idea. Linda had laid out a blanket on the porch, and her fiancé had brought a hot pot of tea in cups. Jody suddenly remembered that she had brought cakes and pastries as a gift, but had forgotten them in the car. She quickly went to get them, and now the tea party was complete. Spencer and Linda sat hugging each other and talking quietly. Spencer's mother was talking excitedly about her plans. "I want to build my own apiary in the village. Build a few houses so the workers have a place to live. Bees are honey, honeycomb, propolis. It is useful everywhere. And we bring honey from Altai, as if we don't know how to do anything ourselves. We'll have such honey that everything will smell. Here is an ideal place for an apiary. Just don't be lazy. And the nature is marvelous. There's plenty of space. And how many medicinal herbs grow, and everyone walks by. Although herbal collections for treatment, it's one thing, herbal teas another. Something and for seasonings will do." "Mom's always like that," Spencer said. "A new idea is to her what first love is to some people." "Like you're not," Tina laughed. I think it's the right thing to do, Rafael interjected. And she needs to burn. Otherwise, what's the point of her? She'll never succeed if she's not working hard and thinking about when she's going home. You know what I mean. I agree with you, said Jody. Where would I be if I wasn't passionate about my projects? It's only passion that gets you the results you need. Rafa listened to this woman and admired her. So much fire, so much interest in the new business. I think he said, I could come up with a couple more ideas. Not now, but later in town. Will you let me call you? Linda smiled slightly at her fiancé. Spencer answered her with an affectionate smile. Sure, call and we'll talk it over, Jody replied. She stood up and kissed Linda and then her son on both cheeks in turn. I should be getting back. I should be getting back. Me too, Rafael got up from his seat immediately. It's getting late. Everyone has to work tomorrow. He walked to the car, gently supporting the beautiful woman under his arm. A happy, colorful spring was blooming in his heart. Linda became completely different, turned into a real hard worker, met a great guy. And very soon they will start a family. His native village will not die, it will be noisy again. There will be work here, new people will arrive. And Rafael will help it. He'll definitely help it. And today he met a woman he really liked, and maybe they could find their own happiness in each other. You know, Chelsea, he said, let's go someplace cozy right now and talk about plans for this village. I have an early rise tomorrow. Jody looked at him with a wise, understanding smile. I think I can afford to sleep in a little longer tomorrow, she said quietly. Linda and Spencer stood on the doorstep and waved at their parents. Do you think they'll make it? Linda asked. They will, her fiancé said confidently. They deserved it. On her wedding day, the bride received an unexpected call, barely taking a note out of the groom's pocket. Chiara, I'm telling you, stop messing with my son's head, screamed a woman in her 60s in the small kitchen. It seemed that her shout was heard throughout the entire Khrushchevka. I don't want anything for him. It's his choice. Your son is a grown man, and he should know better who to associate his life with, Chiara said. Remember, baby, the woman whispered sharply and leaned closer to Chiara. Eugene will never commit to someone like you. What kind of girl? Chiara asked. The poor, deceitful one. Cunning, the woman whispered. I am not a trickster, the girl replied quietly. Anyone else in her place would have either thrown a temper tantrum or cried. But Chiara kept her composure. She was ready for this conversation. For months now she had been harassed by her mother-in-law Amélie, an overbearing lady who loved her son Eugene very much. Eugene, a modest young man of 28, had chosen a poor girl from the suburbs as his bride. Chiara did not notify her mother. Amélie learned of Chiara's existence by chance when she once again tried to match her son with a neighbor's daughter. In fact, Amélie's neighbor in the cottage village was an official from the region, with whom she had been on long friendly terms since her student days. Amélie herself also became not the last person in the region. Together with her husband Stephen, she founded a considerable company and was still actively engaged in business. Stephen was the complete opposite of his wife, a modest businessman who never meddled in his son's personal life. He was always quietly engaged in his business. Only sometimes he wondered how Eugene was doing. He himself thought the idea of having to marry a bureaucrat's daughter was wild. He believed that marriages of convenience were a thing of the past. Moreover, in spite of Amélie's peculiar character and her ability to make connections with the right people, they conducted their business honestly, and a family alliance with an influential family wouldn't be good for business. So Amélie's motivation was based solely on her outdated notions of nobility and honorable marriages. But realizing the absurdity of the situation did nothing to help Stephen's influence on his wife. Just like Eugene, he was in a subordinate position to Amélie and almost never argued with her. Stephen's friends and relatives at first wondered how such different people could get along together. But apparently this was the secret of their marital happiness. Fervent temperament, Amélie extinguished rational, modest Stephen. She gave their relationship energy, and he processed it and directed in the right direction. But if the elder Stephen was able to find himself next to such a wife, their son Eugene experienced a variety of difficulties during his growing up, and, as it turned out, in the period of quite independent life. The events that took place in Eugene's childhood and adolescence are not of any interest and will cause rather a sense of embarrassment and shame for overprotective Amélie. But Eugene's character went to his father, and was sympathetic to his mother's temperament. Moreover, over time, the situation improved. For example, Amelie did not interfere with her son's idea to move to a rented apartment on his own money. Although initially she planned that Eugene will live in their huge family cottage, which will be inherited by him. After moving in, Eugene was even excited had his mother realized that he had long since become an adult. But one thing made him doubt it. About once a month, Amelie unobtrusively hinted to Eugene about the neighbor's unmarried daughter. Eugene kindly dismissed it, saying she wasn't his type. He was in no hurry to start a family. Then one day he met Chiara, a girl from a working-class family who had lost her father early. She worked as a consultant in a clothing store that Eugene often visited. It wasn't in the center of town, and it didn't sell high-end clothes. Eugene didn't need the glitz. He always wore what he was comfortable with. The cheapness of the clothing store where Chiara worked not only shows Eugene's modesty, but also that she didn't fall in love with him for his money. The workers of the store realized that their customers are mostly not the richest people. That's why, when they first started talking and Chiara didn't know about Eugene's parents, she perceived him as an ordinary, modest guy. It was only later that Eugene told her that he worked for his parents' large company. Chiara was even a little embarrassed at first, but Eugene did his best not to show the difference in their financial situation. As their relationship progressed, the Exile grew closer and closer. Sooner or later, Eugene needed to tell his mom about Chiara coming into his life. He tried to delay the moment as long as possible, but one day he let it slip. That afternoon, Amelie tried again to hint to her son about the neighbor's marriage. "Eugene, please listen to me one more time. You're not a little boy anymore. Maybe it's time you started thinking about your own family." "Mom, let me put it this way. If I'm not a little boy anymore, can I decide when and with whom I should start a family?" "Well, you know how worried I am about you. I don't want you to be used by some girl who's going to see you for your wallet. I know you want what's best for me, but look at me. Is it written on my forehead that I come from a rich family? You have nobility written all over your forehead, son. Give up your nobility. Please, this is the 21st century, not the 19th. What's the century got to do with it? I just don't want you to feel bad about it. Clara's not an option, Mom. But we've talked about it so many times, she's not my type. How much do you know about your own tastes?" "I do." Eugene was starting to get a little annoyed, but then he pulled himself together. "How? Would you say you know who your real taste is?" "You'd be surprised, but I do." Eugene hadn't intended to talk about Chiara on this particular day, but he figured it was the right time. "What?" Amelie was surprised. "Did you find a girl?" "I did. A long time ago, almost 6 months now." "Why didn't you say anything?" "Me? I was afraid of your reaction." "Well, what can I say? You were right to be afraid, weren't you? Who is she? Where did she come from?" Eugene started trying to come up with a better description. "She works in the retail and service industry." "I see." A saleswoman, Amelie said, and pretended to feel sick. "Mom, what are you doing?" Eugene ran to get some water and handed the glass to his mom. "I don't understand your reaction. Who are her parents?" "I don't really know. Dad's dead, I think. Mom works in a factory or something." "You know how to surprise me. What's the difference? Why do you think people who weren't born with a golden spoon in their mouth are second class?" "You're probably too young to realize that. You just can't explain it. You're living in your barbarian stereotypes. Everyone's laughing at you." "What are you talking about?" "Eugene, I'm a laughingstock." "Well, Mom." Eugene thought he was overreacting. "That's not what I meant. I just think it would be better if you reconsidered and accepted Chiara. I'm not taking anyone anywhere. Since you're such an adult, you can live your own life. Don't you even want to meet her?" "No," Amelie said, but she looked her son in the eye. "You know, it's better if I see for myself who she is. You'll get the naughty one." That's good. You'll like her. After that conversation, Eugene's joy was short-lived. After a while, he had some disturbing thoughts. What if his mother had agreed to meet Chiara, not because she wanted to get in touch, but to personally persuade Chiara to break up with him? Amelie was capable of that. Eugene's fears were not in vain. From their first meeting, Amelie had tried to show Chiara where she belonged. Eugene had urged his mother to hold back, and she had partially kept her promise. In front of her son, she played the role of the quiet, calm mother, the future mother-in-law. But as soon as Chiara and Amelie were alone together, the fight would begin. It didn't happen very often. Usually the heated conversation took place over the phone. The first time Amelie called Chiara was the morning after they first met. "Chiara, is that you?" "Yes, who's calling?" "You have a bad memory for voices. It's Amelie." "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't recognize you. It's just the noise outside. But I'm coming home now." "Wait, don't be in a hurry to go home. I don't want Eugene to know about this conversation." Chiara instantly tensed up. "Listen to me carefully. You're not a bad girl at first glance. But remember, I am a predator. I can see through your intentions, and I sense that you are in fact a mercantile shepherdess, and I would hate to see you anywhere near my son again." "Amelie, why are you doing this?" "I really love your son." Come on, tell me your fairy tales. You've got the wrong girl. I'm asking you nicely to leave my son alone." "I'm not bothering him. We have mutual feelings for each other, and I'm not going to break up with Eugene because of your whims." "Oh, so that's how it is. Well, I'm going to make your life a lot of fun." "What do you mean?" "You'll find out. And don't let Eugene find out about this conversation." Chiara, of course, was out of her mind. She wanted to cry, but she couldn't, because then Eugene would suspect something. He'd end up fighting with his mother. And Chiara didn't want to cause any discord between Eugene and Amelie. So they lived like that for a few months. Once every 2 weeks, Amelie would pester Chiara with her talk and threats. But it must be said, nothing went beyond threats. Chiara wondered what Amelie could theoretically come up with to break up her and Eugene start a rumor about a mistress. Someone could frame her. Just in case, Chiara began to behave more carefully, avoided possible casual acquaintances, closed all pages in social networks. In such a state of siege, Chiara's nervous system suffered significantly. But apparently it gave its fruits. In her relationship with Eugene, they were in perfect harmony, and she never got any action from Amelie. Sometimes Chiara wondered if Eugene suspected something. One couldn't be so naive as not to see the maximum heat in the relationship between the girl she loved and her mother. But Eugene was not only modest, but also an impossibly simple man. It was easy enough with him to pretend that everything was fine. He believed it, or just really wanted to believe it. Chiara decided that such naivety would be good for her. Her plan was to just hold out until the wedding. And then Amelie would have no choice but to accept it. And everything went according to her plan. Calls from her potential mother-in-law became much less frequent, and their tone was no longer so categorical. Finally, Eugene proposed to Chiara. Everything happened the classic way: the restaurant, the champagne, the ring. Chiara was absolutely happy. She thought she'd won everything, but she didn't. The proposal was a wake-up call for Amelie. Apparently, the woman had decided she had no chance of ending the relationship, so she went into overdrive. Then Amelie personally went to her son's rented apartment where Eugene and Chiara lived. She deliberately waited until her son was at work to be alone with Chiara. That night they had a conversation in which Amelie called Chiara a fraud. "You're a fraud yourself. You've been leading naive Eugene around by the nose." "Well, you think you got what you wanted, don't you? There's not going to be a wedding. You can't stop Eugene and I from being happy, Amelie." "No, I won't." Amelie just grinned back. She was about to leave when the door opened and Eugene came in. "Oh, Mom, hi. What are you doing here?" "I stopped by to check on the newlyweds." Amelie's acting skills were just fine. Without blinking an eye, she switched from the character of Hera to that of a caring mother-in-law. "That's so wonderful," rejoiced naive Eugene, unsuspecting. "Eugene, Listen, Ciara began to say. There's something I want to tell you. Yes, that's right, son. Ciara and I have been thinking about the best way to have a wedding. Amelie interrupted her. She realized that her potential daughter-in-law was about to snap and tell Eugene about her problem. What are you thinking? Eugene asked. No, I wanted to talk about something else. Ciara continued. I think the wedding should be canceled. There was an oppressive silence. Amelie was as surprised by Ciara's statement as Eugene was. She really thought Ciara was going to complain about her, but apparently she'd managed to squeeze her rival after all. What? Eugene interjected. Did I hear that? No, you didn't hear that. I don't think I'm ready to get married yet. Mom, did you say something to her? Eugene asked irritably. No, I didn't. What does this have to do with me? Amelie shook her head in a negative way, pretending not to understand. Then, Ciara, please explain what's going on. I've decided that we are very different people. I have no place in your circle. What circle? Eugene was puzzled. You're still feeling Mom's influence, aren't you? Look, there is no my circle. It's just you and me in a circle, a two-person circle. We both fit into it perfectly. No, please, at least let me go. I need a pause. Ciara quickly packed her things and left. She ran down the wet sidewalks that hadn't had time to dry from the recent rain. Yes, what Ciara had so feared for the past few months had happened: a violent, hysterical, and uncompromising breakdown. For too long she had tolerated it, feared it, kept it to herself. Just before she left, she wondered if she should say it all to Amelie's face, in front of Eugene. But then it would be a cruel blow to Eugene in the first place. Ciara decided not to upset the tight-knit family. If anything, Eugene would find many more interesting girls. He would not remain lonely, but Ciara was not ready to endure Amelie's attacks for the rest of her life. She realized that the wedding is not a panacea, and a stamp in the passport may not affect the behavior of her mother-in-law. That's why Ciara decided to take such a desperate step. In 20 minutes, she ran to her apartment, entered it, and lay on the couch with her face in the pillow. Her mom had gone to the country during the summer months, so the apartment was empty. Ciara lay on the couch and thought about nothing. She couldn't even cry. There was no strength left for tears. After lying like that for a while, Ciara got up, took a sedative, and went outside again. Just lying there idly, she couldn't do it either. Ciara was in a state where she didn't know what she wanted. But it was necessary to be active. That's when people do stupid things, sometimes the most irreparable. Who knows how that day would have ended for Ciara if a black SUV hadn't honked at her on the way out of the driveway. She turned around, looked at the driver, then at the license plates, and sighed in relief. It was Eugene's father, Stephen's car. Ciara took her time getting into the front seat. "Hello, Stephen," she said quietly. Ciara had only seen Eugene's father twice in her life. He had never visited them himself, and when Eugene invited Ciara to their family cottage, Stephen was usually working. "But hello, Ciara," he said and drove forward. "Where are we going?" "To your place," Ciara asked fearfully. "No, you what? I'm not sending you there. We're going to a nice place. I think we have a lot to talk about." "Okay." Ciara thought it was Eugene who had asked her father to talk to her and bring her back to him. At first she had feared that Stephen would think of nothing better to do than just take her back to the house where the scandals with Amelie would begin again. But as it turned out, Eugene's dad decided to do something more subtle. He took her to a small cafe called Lavender in the center of town. Ciara and Stephen chose a table and ordered. "I love this place," Stephen began to talk while waiting for their order. "Not Amelie's style at all. We usually prefer other places, but you know what I mean? I come here when I want to be alone or to talk to someone about personal matters. The atmosphere is good, not flashy." "Yes, it's very cozy here," Ciara answered and stared. "You probably think it was Eugene who asked me to talk to you, don't you?" "No, it's my own improvisation," Stephen cut to the chase. "I called Amelie about an hour ago on a work-related matter, and she told me about your escape, and I realized I couldn't stay in the shadows any longer. You see, I've always thought that grown-ups can sort out their own relationships. You think so too, don't you? I do, Ciara said. Yes, that's right. Stephen didn't let Ciara finish. But when another powerful person interferes in an adult relationship and, moreover, destroys it, a third person is needed to balance the situation. So I thought I'd be that third person for a while. Thank you. There's nothing to thank me for. I really want you to go back to Eugene. Is that what you want? I don't want Eugene's relationship with his mom to go south. It's not that important right now. Amelia sighed, would you be willing to go back to Eugene? Of course I would. That's a good answer. Now let's think about what's stopping you from doing that. More precisely, who's stopping you from doing it? Stephen asked. Of course you hate to hear Amelie say anything she tells you. I understand that perfectly well. But understand, take a detached view of her. She's not going to do anything bad to you in terms of actual actions, and with time she'll get used to it, and then she'll love it. I know her psychology well. I too thought at first that Amelie would temper her ardor, Ciara said. For a moment I thought that was what was really happening. But as soon as Eugene proposed to me, it started all over again, treating it like a final battle. She decided to concentrate all her resources and pour the maximum out on me. She'll calm down after the wedding, Stephen said confidently. In fact, I'm almost certain that she'll change her attitude toward you much sooner. I don't know, Ciara said hesitantly, but right now she's glad I'm gone. And imagine me coming back. What would her reaction be? I mean, she could do anything. I understand your concerns. So here's what we're going to do. I'll have a serious talk with her, try to moderate her temper, and generally intervene every time she gets on your nerves. Just text me, that's all. I'll call her right away. Okay? But I'll have to bother you every time, Ciara hesitated. Don't worry about that. I'm interested in solving this situation myself. Stephen leaned over and whispered, I never liked those Joneses and their golden daughter. Ciara grinned, knowing full well of Amelie's intentions to marry Eugene off to the neighbor's daughter. And since that's the case, of course I'll let you know. But let's wait at least 24 hours. I'll call Eugene tomorrow, okay? Stephen asked for the bill and paid it. Okay, Ciara, I gotta go. Where do you want to ride? Go. I'll just sit here for a while. Stephen said goodbye to Ciara and left the cafe. Ciara, alone with her tea. She finally had some hope in the last day. Was there really one normal person in Eugene's family who understood how to solve her problem? No, Ciara thought Eugene was normal too. Eugene was too indecisive and naive, and she wanted to keep him away from conflicts with his mother as much as possible. And Stephen had offered his own help. So Ciara shouldn't have worried about his relationship with his wife. Since he had gone to the meeting first, he knew what he was doing. Ciara's musings were interrupted by a tense conversation at a neighboring table. A customer and a waiter were having an argument. I'm sorry, but your card doesn't fit, the waiter said kindly but sternly. What do you mean it doesn't fit? Try again, the customer answered fearfully. I have tried 3 times. It doesn't fit. So, then, your machine does not work. The machine is fine. The other cards are accepted. But wait, what am I supposed to do? I don't have any cash. Try a wire transfer. If I could, I'd offer it myself. I don't have internet on my phone either. You're putting me in an impossible position. I'm sorry, but according to regulations, we have to call the police in such cases. What's 500 rubles? The police? Are you kidding me? Absolutely not. That's the rules. But let me give you my passport as collateral, or my cell phone, and I'll go get the cash. I'm sorry, but that's not allowed. Ciara rarely allowed herself to eavesdrop on other people's conversations. But here the scene was unfolding too close to her, and she became a listener willy-nilly. Moreover, at one point in the argument with the waiter, the customer's voice seemed very familiar to her. Or rather, not the voice, but the intonation so slightly theatrical. Ciara tried to remember where she could have heard those intonations, but nothing came to mind. So she gave in to curiosity and turned around to face the conflicted table. One glance at the customer was enough. Her classmate Noah Salvador's card wasn't working. Ciara didn't wait for the waiter to start calling the police. She got up and walked over to a neighboring table. "Wait, don't call the police," she said quietly to the waiter. "I'm paying for the young man's order." "What?" Salvador didn't immediately realize what was going on. He frantically looked for numbers in the phone book, choosing whom to ask to transfer the money. He didn't even notice that his classmate had come to the table. Then Noah looked up and saw Ciara. "Ciara, where did you happen to be here from?" Ciara smiled back and put her card to the machine. The classmates decided to leave this ill-fated cafe as soon as possible. "Listen, I don't even know how to thank you," Noah said, walking along the sidewalk with Ciara. "Come on, we're not strangers after all. You better tell me how you live." "I live boring. I work as a junior engineer at our chemical plant." "And you?" "I'm not far off either. I sell clothes." You see how much hope they had in us at school? It's all nonsense. You can't tell at school who you can and can't get your hopes up for. And you and I weren't great, let's face it. "Well, you're right about the curriculum," Noah grinned. Noah grinned. We weren't the only ones who paid attention to us in the curriculum, unlike the other one. Salvador immediately understood the meaning of Ciara's clarification. The fact was that Noah for Ciara and Ciara for Noah 15 years ago had become the first high school sweethearts. The whole class had watched their relationship develop, but developed was too loud a word. From the outside, it seemed more like the relationship was standing still and not moving anywhere. Noah and Ciara knew how they felt about each other, but they did nothing about it. They were very timid. No matter how much their classmates tried to push them towards each other, no way. For a whole year, the relationship was in limbo, until Ciara changed school for family reasons. After that, he and Noah saw each other only a few times at reunions, and Salvador even tried to start some kind of communication with Ciara, but that didn't lead to anything. On a personal level, we certainly shone with our indecision. Noah corrected his former classmate. The whole class laughed at us, not laughed at us, but envied us. Oh, of course they were jealous, Ciara smiled. But I think I've changed during this time. I've become much more determined. With girls and how? Any luck? Married? No, just practicing for now. But I mean only very quick relationships so far. You didn't get married either? Not yet. But hopefully there will be a wedding very soon. Until a couple hours ago I doubted it, but things seem to be getting better now. You're not 5 minutes away from being wife, Noah said a little sadly and looked at Ciara. She remembered that look from high school. It seemed to her as if those 15 years didn't even exist for Salvador. Still the same 8th grade. He still feels something for Ciara. And she tells him she's getting married soon. If that were the case, Noah would have the exact same look. Yeah, if everything goes well, of course. Is there any reason to doubt it? But, there are certain circumstances. You don't trust your future husband? No, that has nothing to do with it. Okay, well, I'm just being honest. I'm sorry it was an unnecessary question. Even your number. Do you think that's a good idea? Ciara asked, perplexed. No, you must have misunderstood me. I'd like to wire you the money for the cafe. You paid for me. Oh, forget it. But it would be a real inconvenience. Okay, I'll let you know. Ciara gave her number to Noah. They said their goodbyes and left. Ciara went to her house. She didn't want to go back to Eugene yet. Why she needed that extra 24 hours to think about it, she didn't understand. But something was keeping her from returning soon. Probably the deep trauma Amelie was systematically inflicting. If individually the attacks of a potential mother-in-law could be tolerated and forgotten, then altogether they accumulated into one big psychological trauma. Tonight's quarrel was the last straw. So for at least a night she needed to sleep alone to recover from the incident. The only thing that surprised her a little was the phone was silent. Still, Ciara had thought that Eugene would start calling her immediately after she left. But he didn't. Even on messengers, there wasn't a single message from Eugene, despite the difficult situation. His natural restraint found a way to show itself. However, Kiara was able to find an excuse for this inaction as well. She decided that at first Eugene just didn't want to get under Ciara's hot hand and thought it was better to wait until she cooled down a bit. And then he had simply gotten a call from Stephen, informing him of Ciara's decision to return tomorrow and asking him not to bother her for that 24 hours. With those thoughts, Ciara calmed down and finalized her decision to come back tomorrow. Everything turned out just as Ciara had envisioned, even a little better. The next morning, Eugene called her himself, apologized for the past incident, and asked her to come back. Ciara immediately did just that. Throughout the wedding preparations, to Ciara's delight, Amélie had not made any contact at all. They occasionally called Eugene, but even in those private conversations they didn't seem to mention Ciara. Apparently Stephen had managed to do some serious work with her. Ciara was quietly happy about it and was busy with the wedding arrangements. She was embarrassed to remember that she could have deprived herself of such happiness by simply running away from Eugene. It was a good thing that the wise Stephen had gotten there in time. There was no telling how things would have turned out if he had not, with his usual calmness and prudence, taken up the matter. The wedding was one day away, Ciara's most nervous moment of preparation. The phone rang. She didn't pick it up right away. The problems associated with the ill-fitting dress seemed much more important to her. But soon the phone rang again, and she did pick it up. Amélie popped up on the screen in large letters. Ciara sighed heavily and took the call. "Hello, Ciara, hello," Amélie asked in a voice that wasn't her usual one. She usually managed to give out even her greeting words in a particularly unpleasant tone, but this time the tone was calm and even a bit timid. "Yes, Amélie, hello. I'd like to talk to you, but please don't be frightened. It's not what you think." Amélie felt exactly Ciara's first reaction to her call. "I'd like to talk." All the previous conversations flashed before Ciara's eyes, and for a moment she had time to think that it would start all over again, but if it wasn't going to be the same as always. No, I told you it's not what you think. I promise I won't say a bad word to you. I just really want to talk to you. I think it's better to do it before the wedding. If that's the way you feel, where do you want to meet? Or maybe we could do it over the phone. It wouldn't be over the phone. I'd like to meet at a coffee shop downtown. It's called Lavender. I'll call you a cab. No, that's okay. I know where it is. I don't need a cab. I'll be there in an hour. Okay, then I'll be there in an hour. Ciara was extremely surprised. It was the first time she'd ever heard Amélie's calm voice. And where was she being called to? To the same place where Stephen had brought her back to normal earlier. It's a coincidence, isn't it? After all, he usually held his family dinners in nice, fancy restaurants, and they had chosen the same modest establishment for their moments of privacy. I wonder if they realize it themselves. An hour later, Ciara was at the place. Amélie was running a little late. Ciara chose the same table where she and Stephen were sitting and waited. Literally 5 minutes later, Amélie walked into the room. "Oh, Ciara, you picked my favorite table," she said cheerfully and sat down across from me. "This must be where you and Stephen usually relax, right?" Ciara asked, as if she wanted to check her hunch. "No, we usually vacation in more solid places, you know. And here I like to come alone, and I don't think he knows about it," Amélie answered. "Wow," Ciara said in surprise. She didn't know what surprised her the most. On the one hand, it was strange to hear that Amélie preferred a modest place for privacy. Ciara had always thought the main thing about their pairing was Amélie and her love of local pathos. But here, talking about the more respectable places, she made a face as if she was sick of all those expensive restaurants and was only thinking how she could escape to some humble cafeteria. On the other hand, the coincidence with Stephen seemed even more surprising to Ciara. She had a thought that it was her husband who had told Amélie about the conversation they had had, and that was the reason for the choice of location for tonight's meeting. But as it turned out, it was really a coincidence. I guess the years together have something to do with taste and preferences in non-obvious things. "You must be a little surprised," Amélie said, as if reading Ciara's mind. You must have thought that I'm just a pretentious aunt who cares more about the price tag than anything else in the world. But no, sometimes I want to be modest, you see. Lately I've been thinking more and more about how bored I am with everything. Many years ago I invented the image of a rich diva. In fact, it was never her. Still understand, a girl from a poor family, from a deep province, suddenly finds herself in the circle of golden youth. Anyone's head will be blown off by talk of good perfume and travel to Paris. And as a result, a bouquet of complexes in addition. Stephen has always been sympathetic to this, only sometimes expressing his dislike of what is going on. Though he should love all this agility and bohemia much more than I do. He's one of those golden youths. And I thought that since I had become a Salvador, I had to live up to it. That's how you can rework this text. The outfits, the house, the restaurants, I got used to it all over time. But it wasn't just about material possessions. No, I wanted my loved ones to meet certain standards too. And of course, the most important person to me was Eugene. I felt it was my duty to find the best things in life for him. And what does the best mean in my distorted view? The richest and most expensive, of course. And here just the daughter of the neighbors grew up, but literally everything worked out perfectly. Only thing is, our Eugene took after his father. I'm such an idiot. I should have taken after Stephen. But no, I had to satisfy my need for pathos. Oh, come on, why would you do that? Chiara felt sorry for Amelie. She never thought she could feel pity for this man. But once Amelie had shared a little of her revelations, everything changed at once. No, don't feel sorry for me, Amelie said. You have every right to hate me. I just want you to understand the nature of my initial attitude toward you. All those complexes and rich prejudices were very repulsive. When Eugene told you, all my ideas of right living collapsed in an instant. The deep complexes that prevented me from accepting you turned into outright boorishness. Although in fact many years ago I was in the same position as you. Or maybe, Amelie wondered, there's nothing wrong with me, Ciara asked. I was just thinking, maybe I was trying to save you. I'm sorry. What do you mean? Well, I just didn't want you to make the same mistakes I made subconsciously. You have the same potential to pick up those same complexes and become a petty woman like me. Although I'm not looking for excuses. You're completely different and will never, thankfully, become like me. No, you're absolutely right, Ciara said. I too have been and continue to be uncomfortable with wealth. And maybe if you hadn't decided to tell your story, it would have happened all over again, Ciara said. It's good that you realize that. I don't know if you forgive me for all these cruel conversations we've had. I don't think I could forgive myself. In fact, if I were you, I'd run away or give Eugene an ultimatum. It was either me or your mom. I had that thought, Ciara grinned. But I thought it was too harsh. By the way, how did Stephen's mom take you in? Amelie turned to the window and stared out for 15 seconds. Let's just say it wasn't the best experience I can give you, she finally said. Stephen's mom was a bossy woman, like me, only unlike me. She'd been rich all her life. I don't know how the Salvador family managed to make a good fortune during the Soviet era. Stephen's father was a prominent party figure, but that wasn't a guarantee of success back then. Anyway, it doesn't matter how. But Stephen's parents lived much richer than the average Soviet citizen. It really surprised me, Amelie continued. I used to walk around their apartment and dacha with my mouth open, imagining how I would have foreign clothes and real French perfume. You probably wouldn't understand that now. There is everything from every country on the shelves. You can buy it all you want. It is there, but not everyone can buy it, Ciara corrected. And the quality is not always original. So there is a choice, of course, but not everyone can use this choice. Well, you see, again this vacuum of rich life appears, said Amelie. Apparently in my world everyone can buy everything. I guess that's okay. You don't have to know all the realities. Yes, I do, Ciara argued. Sometimes that ignorance can lead to the most unpleasant consequences, like you lashing out at me. Okay, let's get back to your question, Amelie said. As you've probably guessed by now, Stephen's mother didn't accept me either, only she never said so openly. Then how did you know she didn't accept you? Ciara asked. You know, it happens when you walk into a house and you feel with every fiber of your being that you're hated, Amelie said. People don't have to express their hatred out loud. It's just a look, an intonation, something like that. Moreover, at some point Stephen stopped calling me to his house, trying to make sure that his mother and I never crossed paths. His parents didn't even come to our wedding, she continued. Stephen said they had some very important things to do, but I knew right away. They never accepted me into their family. Stephen's mom had passed away pretty early in life, and we never got a chance to explain ourselves. On the other hand, you didn't fight with her, did you? Ciara tried to reassure me. Yes, she never raised her voice at me, Amelie replied. But, you know, sometimes it's better to have all your emotions confronted in person than to have them stored somewhere deep inside. I think that her early departure may have something to do with the fact that she kept it all to herself, never let her emotions out. But who knows? Maybe I was just making it up as I went along. Are you blaming yourself for your mother-in-law's early death? Ciara wondered. No, I don't blame myself, but I think I caused her a lot of distress. Most importantly, hidden distress. She was just very fond of Stephen, so she didn't want to talk about it openly. And I must have been a bad mother to act so rudely. In the end, you made the right choice, Ciara said. We were able to have a human conversation after all. Explain ourselves. It's a lot better than keeping it to yourself. You did better than Stephen's mom? But what could I have driven you to? Amelie sighed. But it's all right. You didn't drive me to anything. I'm not the weakest of characters, you know. I've been hurt by your barbs, of course, Ciara said. But it's all right, I put up with it. Except for the last time. And then I did the wrong thing. I should have acted right away, told Eugene and Stephen. I told you I didn't want to upset your relationship with Eugene, so I kept quiet, she continued. And about Stephen, I hardly knew him. Before that unexpected conversation, as it turned out, I hardly knew him either. No, I mean, I knew he was a good psychologist, but not that good. He'd built a solid business from scratch. I was involved, of course, but more as a doer, just doing what he told me to do. Didn't you say that Stephen was one of the golden youth? Ciara asked. Yes, he was. Amelie nodded. But what kind of business in the Soviet Union? He created his own companies, his own. And not like many people back then, he bought a factory for cheap and started to cut money from it. He rented premises, bought equipment, all by himself, with initial capital. Maybe he had it easier than others, of course. But nobody gave him $1 million. His father took the collapse of the Union hard, so he was skeptical of Stephen's idea to create his own enterprise. Almost didn't help. Is that what I'm getting at? Amelie took a sip of coffee. Entrepreneurs, businessmen are a special breed. Oh, I've seen a lot of them over the years. Some of them make me sick. Some bad, some good. But they all have something in common: grip, speed, toughness. But if you look at Stephen from the outside, there's none of that. Not even just from the outside. At home, he's a harmless man who I would never trust to run a big company. I'm much more of an entrepreneur than he is, by the way. Amelie smiled. But no. After all, the company has risen, and in the most difficult time for the country. Not just raised, but developed and successfully managed it to this day. How, you may ask, how can one be a successful entrepreneur with such a character? I did not immediately begin to think about it. You see, when you live with a person for many years, you don't notice their characteristic features, Amelie continued. You take everything as normal. But at every meeting with entrepreneurs, at every business lunch, I felt uncomfortable. I just didn't like those rich guys. But with my Stephen, it was always so nice, so relaxed. That's when I started to notice that he was different from the usual entrepreneurs. I forgot about it for a while. Different, so what I thought. That's why I married him and not someone else. But with each new meeting, with each new acquaintance, eccentric businessman, I thought again about Stephen's character. And then the truth finally began to dawn on me. Stephen has some kind of psychological skill that helps him solve all business problems. Amelie paused, taking a sip of coffee. At first it seemed to me that this is only a small part of the success of his company. After all, I was in charge of a lot of the negotiations. But as time went on, I realized that Stephen's silent, modest participation was a much bigger part of our success than my loud and flashy negotiations. Like a spider, he quietly weaves his web, graciously invites his competitors, partners, and subordinates into his web, envelops them, and then does whatever he wants with them, Amelie said emotionally. Somehow he manages to find weaknesses, pain points, or just the most important thing in some issue. Stephen quietly presses on these points and gets the desired result. I thought at the time that he only did that in business. In life, he's quieter than water, lower than grass. He's unpretentious, he doesn't demand anything. He just doesn't need to show his psychological skills. But that's not the case. It was only in the last month that I realized that he had been using those skills throughout our life together. It's just that Stephen did it so neatly that I didn't notice. And anyway, I guess he was okay with my hot temper. That's why he wasn't very active in fixing our relationship. After all, marriage is not a business. There are other processes at work, Amelie said. How did you notice it in the end? What happened? In the last month, something that had never happened in your entire life together. You happened, she grinned. But Eugene and I started our relationship much earlier. Yes, but Stephen had stayed out of it all this time. And then he decided to clean up the mess. That's when I realized. Why did Stephen decide to interfere? Ciara wondered. Oh, I don't know. It's so unlike him. Usually he's separate and Eugene's personal life is separate. I think the answer is obvious, Amelie shrugged. He just felt sorry for you. Realized you were suffering because of me. He waited and waited, and at the most decisive moment he acted like that. What did he do besides talk to me? He had 2 conversations with me, calmly, without raising his voice. He carefully explained everything. After that, my worldview completely changed. I have never worked with psychologists, but I think people experience something similar after a long therapy with professional psychologists. He brought me back down to earth and explained what I looked like from the outside. And in 2 conversations, Stephen managed to change your personality? Ciara asked incredulously, as you can see, only not quite like that. Amelie shook her head. He didn't change my personality. Stephen helped me to shed the tinsel that hung over my real identity, those awful rich man complexes and prejudices. She took a sip of coffee. The first conversation happened after you ran away. I don't know what clicked with him, but that evening of that day, Stephen sat down with me and bluntly told me he wanted to talk. He told me how he'd talked to you, what a positive girl you really are. And then he started asking simple leading questions, the answers to which made me realize how stupid it was to act like that. After that, I decided to give you a break, no calling, no texting, avoiding seeing you. I thought that you hated me and would not agree to even a normal, calm conversation, such as we have now. And last night we had a second conversation. He reminded me about our personal history, about my relationship with his mother. Amelie continued. Yesterday I finally realized how wrong I was about you. And I decided that we should end this ridiculous feud before the wedding, and as openly as possible. Explaining to you everything that I realized about myself not so long ago. I hope I've done that. And I hope even more that you'll forgive me. She looked at Ciara. Of course I will, she nodded. You are a very strong man. Only strong people are able to change so dramatically in such a short time, and at the same time, looking in the eyes, apologize. Strong people don't torture their fiancé for such a long time. Amelie waved her hand. Did you have a reason to do it? Well then, let's put it behind us, Ciara said. Although the last thing I really don't want is for you to repeat my mistakes. The most important thing in a marriage, in any marriage, and especially when it comes to any financial matters, is to stay yourself. Yeah, thanks for the warning. I more than understood. Amelie nodded. Good for you. Well, I won't keep you any longer. Get ready for tomorrow, for the great happiness that will come. Ciara said goodbye to Amelie and left the cafe. Outside it was going to rain again. The people of the city were not lucky with the weather this summer. Ciara hailed a cab, sat in the back seat, and leaned against the window, thinking. The cab driver, seeing the pensive expression on her face, did not distract her with conversation, put on some quiet radio station, and silently drove Ciara home. Ciara really had a lot to think about. It seemed like she should have been driving in bewilderment at the conversation that had taken place. After all, how was it possible that Eugene's mother, who had been driving her for over a year, turned out to be not only a subtle and sensitive person, but also found the strength to apologize and explain everything to Kiara. But it wasn't the sudden transformation of roles and attitudes towards her mom that she was thinking about. She felt like she'd just been chatting with a friend she'd known for years. Absolutely the same feelings. Kiara trusted Amelie completely, didn't doubt the sincerity of her every word. Everything was so ordinary, so peaceful, that she forgot all the hardships this woman had put her through. Someone had erased all the negativity from her memories of Amelie. And now Kiara was just driving and enjoying the moment. She didn't even have to think about tomorrow's wedding. She was already happy. "I'm sorry, you're so thoughtful," the cab driver broke the silence. "Is something important coming up?" "Yes, you're very clever," Kiara smiled. "Something important indeed." "Well, what could be important for a young, beautiful girl?" "A wedding, a divorce." "Still a wedding," she nodded. "Oh, today I'm especially perceptive." The cab driver praised himself. "Are you a little nervous?" "That's right. It's better to be nervous beforehand, so that there won't be any problems later." He began to tell an incredibly interesting story of his life, which Kiara stopped listening to at the second sentence. It wasn't until the end of the story that she came to her senses. "So you should always be on your guard," the cab driver warned emotionally. "Always, especially before a wedding. There will always be those who want to upset her. So girl, I hope that you will not repeat my mistakes and will not trust everyone at once. We're here now, by the way." The car was indeed pulling into the courtyard of Eugene and Kiara's house. After paying the driver, she went up to the house. Eugene was gone, so Kiara was once again alone with her thoughts. She couldn't remember what the shrewd cab driver had been talking about, but his last words crashed into her head. Maybe she really was in a hurry to trust Amelie. What if this was some last-ditch, multi-pronged scheme on the part of her future mother-in-law? Or rather, if her scheme succeeded, she would never become a mother-in-law. Kiara said to herself, "Stop. Why am I so nervous? Some cab driver said something stupid and I believed it right away. No, you need to calm down and ignore all sorts of insignificant things. It was all nerves." Kiara shamed herself and continued to prepare for the wedding. Tomorrow needed to be planned once more. She and Eugene decided to do away with hackneyed traditions, like the groom not seeing the bride before the wedding in her dress and other classic superstitions. They decided to go to the registry office together and then modestly go to celebrate in a restaurant. They did not want a lot of guests, only Kiara's parents, Eugene's mom, a few friends and girlfriends. It seemed that there should not be any difficulties with the organization. The only thing was that Kiara was worried whether she would have time to go to the beauty salon before the registry office. But there much depended on the speed of the master, not on her. The next day, Kiara went to the salon even earlier than she had planned. She called the master in advance and clarified whether there was free time. Kiara had been to this salon literally several times in her life. Usually she solved her appearance by herself. She did her hair, manicure and pedicure with her own hands. At first, she just didn't have money for all these masters, and then, even when Eugene and she had the opportunity to go anywhere, the habit of doing everything herself remained. And it must be said, Kiara was pretty good at it. So there was no need for beauty salons. But the wedding was a special day, and Kiara decided to trust the hands of a master. They chose a hairstyle together, and the girl began to work on her hair. Kiara watched her hands carefully, ready to stop in time, for example, if she wanted to cut off too much hair. After a couple minutes, she calmed down a bit, relaxed, and stopped this total control. Kiara decided that the master knew his business and there was no need to keep glaring at her. But it wasn't long before she had to tense up again. The phone rang in her pocket. At first, she didn't want to pick up the phone, not wanting to interrupt the master's work process. All the more reason for her to have the call on silent. The ringing stopped. Kiara had time to exhale, but then the phone rang again. "If anything, you can answer it. It won't interfere with our work," said the girl master kindly, who, as it turned out, also heard those quiet calls. "Okay," Kiara replied, pulling her phone out of her pocket and taking the call. "Hello, speaking." "Kiara, good afternoon." A rough male voice sounded in the receiver. It sounded as if it had been changed on purpose in a computer program. "Who is this?" Kiara asked without saying hello. She immediately sensed something wrong. It's, shall we say, a well-wisher. Who? I don't understand. A well-wisher. I want you to have a good life. Stop this circus. Identify yourself immediately. Calm down, Ciara. There's no need to be angry. My job is to help you. So please listen to me and don't hang up on me. It's for your own happiness. I know what I need for my own happiness. If you're not going to introduce yourself, I'm hanging up. Have a nice day. Ciara thought she'd gotten a scam call and was about to hang up. Wait, it's about your wedding, shouted the man into the phone, and it worked. Ciara didn't bother to press the reset button. Speak then? Only clearly, quickly, and without idiotic mystery. Okay, I'll be as direct as possible. You need to cancel the wedding immediately because the man you want to marry is not who he says he is. What the hell are you talking about? Who the hell are you? I can't reveal my identity yet because it would be worse for both of us. Eugene is a traitor and a cheater. He's been living a double life and lying to you for years. So stop it right now. On what grounds am I supposed to believe you? On any basis. I'm telling the truth. And tonight, if you don't cancel the wedding, you'll see it for yourself. Eugene will cheat on you during the ceremony. Look, that's ridiculous. It's not even funny. Couldn't you think of anything more plausible? Well, don't believe me, but you're going to regret it today. Right now, canceling the wedding is still within your power. Right now, you can avoid tomorrow's embarrassment and prevent the rest of your life from being traumatized. Please believe me. How do you even envision this? I have to cancel my wedding because some scammer called me and talked trash about my fiancé. But it's still your choice. Yeah, it sounds risky, but trust me, it's worth it. I mean, it's going to be late tonight. You can't wash away the shame. You have a few hours to think about it. I warned you. That's it. I can't hear it anymore. Goodbye. Ciara ended the call and threw the phone in front of the mirror. She looked at the girl master. She calmly continued working, pretending nothing was happening. But it was clear from her eyes that she was a little shocked at what was happening. Ciara urgently needed someone to share her impressions of the call with, so she was the first to speak. I don't understand how this is even possible. A stranger calls, introduces himself to me and tries to upset my wedding. But what the hell is that? So no mood will remain. Don't worry, the master reassured Ciara. The closer an important event is, the more unnecessary problems will arise. Maybe it was a secret admirer called you, who does not want you to marry. Or, for example, the former revenge. Come on, how could I have secret admirers? And anyway, do you know how many years ago my previous relationship ended? I think all the exes have long since forgotten me. I mean, maybe some scammers will call again, demanding money to make the wedding a success. Maybe they're scammers, although I've never heard of such elaborate schemes. Okay, let's see. The master finished her work and Ciara drove home. In the cab, she was still as pensive as yesterday. Only this time the cab driver was able to keep silent for the rest of the ride. Ciara thought about that mysterious phone call. She carefully chased one thought away, but it came back again and again. It was the thought of Amelie's involvement in the call. Hadn't it all been part of her big plan yesterday? To put her guard down, to draw suspicion away from herself, and then set this nonsense in motion today. There was no reason for Ciara to really suspect Amelie. She forced herself to believe it was just her prejudices and nothing more. For one thing, the scheme was too complicated. Amelie could come up with something much simpler and more axe-headed. She doesn't need to hire people, bust up a comedy act in a cafe to issue an ultimatum, or have a tough face-to-face talk with Ciara. And secondly, Amelie was already very convincing yesterday. Ciara had worked in sales for a long time, and was good at recognizing when a person was faking it, and when they really, for example, liked a certain thing. Amelie, of course, is not a jacket buyer. But the principle is the same. Yesterday, when she talked about moments from her youth, about Stephen's mom, she had real tears in her eyes. Yes, she was able to hold them back. But Ciara saw those tears. So Amelie's fake version of the story seemed pretty wild to her. The cab driver drove her home quickly. Chiara arrived with plenty of time to spare. Eugene had just woken up. His mood was good. "You look gorgeous," he said to Chiara as he looked at her new hairstyle. "Thank you," the bride thanked Eugene and hugged him. She hugged him silently for a few minutes. "Is everything okay, Chiara?" Eugene asked, looking at Ciara's silence. Yes, everything is fine," she answered him in an unsure tone. "Are you worried about the wedding?" Eugene was not convinced by Ciara's words. "A little. Probably more than I should be, though. I know I'm nervous, too. I mean, we're advanced people, you and me. It's just a few drops of ink on a passport. Why should we worry about it? We should just think of the wedding as a celebration. Enjoy it." "You make a good point," Ciara said and sighed. "What's wrong with you?" Eugene hugged his fiancée even tighter. "Are you sure it's just the wedding that's bothering you? Nothing else has happened?" "How's Mom?" "Nothing," Ciara answered. "I had a heart-to-heart talk with her last night." "She didn't call again?" "No, I don't mean my mom, I mean yours." "How is she? Does she have time to come to the wedding from the village? How's she doing?" "Mine's fine. She'll make it." "She was wondering how you're doing." Unlike Amelie, Ciara's mom took to Eugene immediately. She didn't have a problem with her future son-in-law. She trusted her daughter's choice. "Well, that's good. So everyone will be together today, for the first time since we've been together. Or is that what you're worried about?" You could say that, Ciara answered, not quite lying to Eugene. She was of course more worried about the call, but Chiara wasn't forgetting about her mom's upcoming meeting with Amelie either. There was no telling how it might end. Her mom was a simple woman. She might say something to Amelie if she started to show her temper. She could only hope that Amelie's transformation from yesterday would spread to the wedding festivities and everything would go quietly and calmly. Ciara was sure of her mother. She would never provoke a conflict, but she could react. "I think everything will be fine. People are adults. They understand everything. Dad will be there if anything happens. He'll keep an eye on everyone, won't he?" Eugene grinned, hinting at his mom's complicated nature. "Yeah, that's comforting." Stephen's presence really did give Ciara a guarantee of a quiet evening. The man had recently demonstrated exceptional wisdom and ability to resolve difficult conflicts. "Okay, as long as we're all good. What's wrong? Why do you have such a sad look on your face, Eugene?" Ciara stared intently into her fiancé's eyes. "Tell me honestly, you're not going to leave me for anyone, are you?" "What's the matter, Ciara?" "No, I'm not." Eugene was a little taken aback by the unexpected question from Ciara. "And in the whole time we've been together, you haven't cheated on me with anyone?" she asked. "I haven't," Eugene answered. "Listen, I'm a little scared by your questions. What's wrong?" "Nothing." Ciara hugged Eugene again. "If you're so faithful, nothing happened. Everything's fine." They sat like that until they left for the registry office. Ciara had the thought of telling Eugene about the call, but she didn't dare to do it. It looked too stupid from the outside, and not just from the outside. Ciara herself thought the situation was as stupid as possible. Telling Eugene would only spoil his mood. And at a wedding there should be at least one person with a festive mood. Moreover, even if she made the most unrealistic assumption and thought that the man calling wasn't lying and that Eugene was really the last scoundrel, he would never admit it, and will deny it anyway. So initiating Eugene into the mysterious caller seemed to Ciara from all sides a wrong decision. She thought the best thing to do right now would be to forget about the call. Yes, it wouldn't be possible to completely get rid of the intrusive thoughts. One way or another, the subject would come up for her during the celebration. But at least try worth, especially right at the wedding. And it will turn out to finally make sure that this call is a fiction of some fraudsters. After all, according to their claims, Eugene was supposed to cheat at the wedding. That seemed to her the most delusional of all the information she'd gotten from John Doe. At a wedding, the groom is almost always in the public eye. Why would he cheat right there? Even if Eugene was a pathological cheater, why wouldn't he wait a bit? And how would the caller know that? Anyway, the more Ciara thought about the call, the more she found it absurd. and she calmed down. The long-awaited hour of the trip to the registry office came. There everything went modestly, tastefully, and without incident. Ciara and Eugene were solemnly declared husband and wife, and now they were on their way to the restaurant to celebrate the wedding. The newlyweds didn't bother with too much pomp and order limousines to the venue. They were driven by Stephen and Emily to the restaurant. Ciara went into the ladies' room with her already established mother-in-law. "Ciara, congratulations again, and I apologize," Amelie said kindly. "You are now officially part of our extended family." "Thank you," Ciara replied just as kindly. "There is no need to apologize. A new page in our relationship has begun. Who remembers the old, you know?" Wise beyond her years, Ciara. Amelie noted and went out into the hall. Ciara was left with a little makeup touch-up. During the whole event at the registry office and on the way to the restaurant, she never once remembered about the mysterious phone call. Now the conversation with Amelie reminded Ciara of her unfounded suspicions about her mother-in-law. Now she was completely convinced that Amelie had nothing to do with it. What did she care anyway? Ciara also went out into the hall and took her place next to the groom. The celebration went on quietly. Chiara's mom quickly found common language with Amelie, and now they were sitting together and discussing the children. The first hour of the celebration passed, then the second. The waiters only had time to bring new bottles of wine and strong drinks. Despite the high degree of fun, there were no conflicts. The news of the wedding had reached the more distant relatives of Ciara and Eugene. You bet, because Ciara posted the wedding photo in one of the social networks. After that, the unexpected calls from various friends of the past began. Ciara and Eugene's 3 siblings had to leave the table outside or into quiet areas of the restaurant to be able to hear the caller. At some point, Ciara got tired of this and sat with the phone right at the table. Just then, Eugene got another call and went somewhere from behind the table. A minute later, the phone rang at Ciara's desk as well. She picked it up, saw another unspecified number, and pressed accept the call. "Hello, Ciara, did you recognize me? Is it hard to hear?" A rough male voice sounded in the receiver. "Who is this?" "I called you this morning and warned you about something." "Oh, you again," Ciara sobered up. "What do you want?" "I don't need anything anymore. All I could do was warn you. Didn't you listen? Now all you have to do is reap the consequences of your mistakes." "Cut the crap." Ciara left the table and went to a quieter corner. "Can you be traced by your phone number? Do you even know about that?" "Oh, Ciara, you're a naive girl," the stranger grinned. "And to make sure that I'm not lying, you only need to put your hand in the pocket of your husband's jacket. Anyway, you know everything. Call me, please, on this number. Have a good day." The man hung up. Ciara turned around and slowly walked to the table. Eugene still hadn't returned. As luck would have it, he had gone out to talk in just his shirt and left his jacket hanging on the chair. Ciara reluctantly sat down in her seat, looked around, and carefully slipped her hand into Eugene's jacket pocket. There she fumbled for some paper. The girl looked around again and pulled it out. The paper was neatly folded several times and smelled of perfume. Ciara put her hands under the table and unfolded the note, trying to keep a nonchalant expression on her face. The note had only a few words written on it in good handwriting: 07000 in the small banquet room. Waiting. Ciara looked at her watch. It showed 6:55. She wasn't quite sure what was even going on. It all seemed like some kind of idiotic prank. Maybe someone really decided to play a prank on me. Ciara soothed herself. But Eugene knows how much I don't like pranks. Oh, I don't like it. Ciara got up from the table and walked around the room. She knew this restaurant had 2 banquet rooms. The note was probably referring to just the second, smaller banquet room. Ciara didn't immediately decide to head there. It still felt very much like some kind of joke. Maybe she shouldn't fall for it then. But on the other hand, if someone with a dubious sense of humor decided to play a prank on the wedding, why not play along with Eugene? Ciara still had hope that she just wouldn't find that small banquet hall. But no, her gaze traitorously stopped just outside the small banquet hall sign. She glanced at her watch once more. It took her about 5 minutes to think about it. Then Ciara carefully opened the door and peered inside. The room was in disrepair. with chairs on the tables and decorations lying on the floor. Toward one of those decorations, some girl, most likely a waitress, was clinging passionately to her newfound husband. Chiara went numb. That's it. That's it. That's enough," Eugene quietly muttered, barely moving his tongue. Chiara watched in silence. "Oh, so there you are?" Amélie's joyful voice sounded. "We've been looking all over the restaurant for you. And here we are, a wedding without the newlyweds." The woman didn't have time to finish her sentence. She too had looked into the unfortunate room. Chiara turned around and quickly ran to the exit. Amélie tried to catch up with her. Eugene finally realized that he had been spotted. He jumped up, but only managed to walk a few steps and collapsed. "Chiara, my girl, I beg you. Wait," her mother-in-law urged her, catching up with her at the door of the restaurant. "Don't, please. You were right. Then I have no place in your family." "Stop it. What are you saying?" "What am I saying? Why don't you check with your son? What a fool I was. How long has he been playing me for?" "Wait, give me just 1 minute," Amélie pleaded. "I can imagine what you're feeling right now, but I'm just as confused as you are. I don't think we should jump to conclusions." "Amélie, I understand your desire to protect your son, but how can you jump to conclusions? You saw it all yourself." "I did," Amélie nodded. "But this is nothing like my son. Let's do this. Will you give Stephen and me at least 12 hours? Now you promise me that in those 12 hours you won't do anything stupid and you won't run away. We'll take Eugene back to our place. You saw the state he's in."
"Okay," Chiara agreed grudgingly. "But I don't know what will change in the meantime. At least we'll try to figure it out."
"Don't worry, there's no shame yet, except for you and me. No one's seen Eugene. I'll go back and tell the guests that the newlyweds have decided to celebrate at home alone. We'll try to get Eugene out of here without being seen. You go home. But again, please don't do anything stupid." "I'll try," Chiara said, turning around and walking toward the house in her wedding dress. "Where are you going?" Amélie stopped her. "Let me call you a cab." Her mother-in-law called Chiara a cab and sent her home. Chiara got there in a semi-fainting state. For her, everything that was happening was like a terrible dream that would not end. She collapsed on the couch and sighed heavily. Chiara stared at the ceiling silently, tears streaming from her eyes. She didn't even have the strength to change her clothes. She lay like that for several hours until she was awakened by the intercom ringing. Chiara didn't want to go open the door. She didn't want to do anything at all, but it wouldn't stop ringing. So then she forced herself to get up and open the door. Amélie and Stephen walked into the apartment. "Chiara, you have your laptop next to you. Is it busy?" my father-in-law asked. "Yeah, it was lying around here somewhere." Chiara opened the laptop and handed it to Stephen. "Great. Now you're going to see something." He inserted a small flash drive into the laptop and turned on the video. It turned out to be the restaurant's security footage. It showed Eugene standing and talking on the phone. At some point he felt sick, leaned against the wall and tried to go outside. At that point, the waitress stopped Eugene and asked him to come with her. She actually walked him up to the empty banquet room and laid him down on a couch. The waitress then stood at the front door and glanced back and forth at the next room, then at her phone. After reading some message, she stood by the door for a while longer, and then approached Eugene. He awkwardly tried to push her away and mumbled something to himself. Then the waitress forcefully tried to kiss him. At the same moment, Chiara looked into the room. "So that's what this is all about," she said with rounded eyes. "I told you we'd figure it out." Amélie summarized the video. "Wait, so Eugene was drugged? How's he feeling right now? We should call the police, request an evaluation." "I don't think we're going to need the police here," Stephen told her. "Eugene is sleeping it off at our house right now. His pulse is fine. His blood pressure's fine. It's okay. He needs his sleep. I did the forensics myself. I just picked up Eugene's glass. I wouldn't mistake this blend for anything. It's just wine and vodka." "What do you mean, vodka?" Chiara was surprised. "We didn't even order vodka." Some waiter was diligently pouring Eugene a strong wine. Vodka it was. I saw, had regular wine, but Eugene, he's not very good with booze. Wine and beer are fine, but anything stronger, his body can't take it. Apparently, the organizers of this performance did not know about such a reaction of Eugene and thought that he would just be tipsy and would fall for some girl. But our fighter fell asleep early. Fantastic. Ciara couldn't get over the shock. So the cameras don't show who was involved in the wine and vodka spiking? No, they didn't have cameras in the kitchen. There are cameras at the bar, but I couldn't get footage there. I could barely get these from the security guard in the lounge. It was the same waitress who poured Eugene's drink, Stephen said. So we have to talk to that waitress, Ciara whispered. I'm not sure how they knew you'd get to the other room at the right time. No, it makes sense, Ciara told her mother-in-law about the 2 mysterious phone calls in the note. Listen, it's like a movie. Emile wondered, why didn't you tell Eugene everything at once? I didn't think it was so serious. I thought it was just some kind of fraud. I didn't want to ruin Eugene's mood over nothing, Ciara sighed. Yeah, Emile nodded. I wonder what his reaction will be when he wakes up. I don't think it will be soon, Stephen answered. Knowing some peculiarities of his body, he won't wake up until tomorrow morning. What are we going to do then? Ciara asked, confused. That's right. I suggest we finish what we started. Call your mysterious admirer. Tell him that you were wrong, and that you were convinced of what a traitor Eugene was. Thank him and ask him to meet you, preferably right away. Ciara understood, pulled out her phone, and did as Stephen told her. The meeting was set for half an hour later in a nearby public garden. Emile and Stephen arrived there a little early, pretending to be a couple who decided to take a walk before going to bed. Ciara changed her clothes and went to the public garden 2 minutes before the appointed time. She saw a male figure walking towards her with a brisk gait. The stranger had his cap pulled low. It was impossible to tell who it was from afar. Why didn't you want to give me your phone number that time, Ciara? You wouldn't have learned so much, the man said cheerfully, and took off his cap. So it's you, Ciara exclaimed. Before her stood her former classmate Noah Salvador. I don't know how to thank you. No way. It's enough to go on a date with me. How did you get all that information about Eugene? Connections. Like the waitress at the restaurant where you work who can pour vodka into wine just in time. Ciara was slapped hard before she could finish. You used to be just an indecisive person, but now you've become even more vicious and pathetic. Suddenly, Ciara was approached by her father-in-law and mother-in-law. What, so this is the show organizer? Stephen asked.
I see. But I think he could be prosecuted for slander. And if the actions with drinks are qualified as injury to health. Oh, I'm afraid he won't get off with a suspended sentence, he said.
Ciara, I'm sorry, Noah said pitifully. I just loved you all these years. I can't stand to see you, you bastard. Ciara turned away and looked at Stephen and Emily. Well, Ciara, I think this man's fate is in your hands, her mother-in-law said calmly. What am I supposed to do with him? Ciara sighed and turned to Noah again. Then that's it, get out of here. But if I see you anywhere even casually again, we will seek a criminal case. Do you understand? Yes, Noah answered obediently. He turned around and walked quickly towards the exit. Stephen and Emily drove Ciara to their family cottage. They chatted in the kitchen and mocked the previous day. As it turned out, the rest of the wedding guests had guessed nothing and continued to celebrate without the bride and groom. Eugene woke up the next day with a terrible hangover and huge memory lapses. He didn't even remember any of the waitresses. Ciara and her mother-in-law and father-in-law decided not to tell him anything. So unusually began a new family page in the life of a modest girl, Ciara.
Hello, Ciara, did you recognize me? Is it hard to hear? A rough male voice sounded in the receiver. Who is this? I called you this morning and warned you about something.
Oh, you again, Ciara sobered up. What do you want? I don't need anything anymore. All I could do was warn you. Didn't you listen? Now all you have to do is reap the consequences of your mistakes. Cut the crap. Ciara left the table and went to a quieter corner. Can you be traced by your phone number? Do you even know about that? Oh, Kiara, you're a naive girl, the stranger grinned. And to make sure that I'm not lying, you only need to put your hand in the pocket of your husband's jacket. Anyway, you know everything. Call me, please, on this number. Have a good day. The man hung up. Ciara turned around and slowly walked to the table. Eugene still hadn't returned. As luck would have it, he had gone out to talk in just his shirt and left his jacket hanging on the chair. Ciara reluctantly sat down in her seat, looked around, and carefully slipped her hand into Eugene's jacket pocket. There she fumbled for some paper. The girl looked around again and pulled it out. The paper was neatly folded several times and smelled of perfume. Ciara put her hands under the table and unfolded the note, trying to keep a nonchalant expression on her face. The note had only a few words written on it in good handwriting: 07000 in the small banquet room. Waiting. Ciara looked at her watch. It showed 6:55. She wasn't quite sure what was even going on. It all seemed like some kind of idiotic prank. Maybe someone really decided to play a prank on me. Ciara soothed herself. But Eugene knows how much I don't like pranks. Oh, I don't like it. Ciara got up from the table and walked around the room. She knew this restaurant had 2 banquet rooms. The note was probably referring to just the second, smaller banquet room. Ciara didn't immediately decide to head there. It still felt very much like some kind of joke. Maybe she shouldn't fall for it then. But on the other hand, if someone with a dubious sense of humor decided to play a prank on the wedding, why not play along with Eugene? Ciara still had hope that she just wouldn't find that small banquet hall. But no. Her gaze traitorously stopped just outside the small banquet hall sign. She glanced at her watch once more. It took her about 5 minutes to think about it. Then Ciara carefully opened the door and peered inside. The room was in disrepair, with chairs on the tables and decorations lying on the floor. Toward one of those decorations, some girl, most likely a waitress, was clinging passionately to her newfound husband. Ciara went numb. That's it. That's it. That's enough, Eugene quietly muttered, barely moving his tongue. Ciara watched in silence. Oh, so there you are. Amélie's joyful voice sounded. We've been looking all over the restaurant for you. And here we are, a wedding without the newlyweds. The woman didn't have time to finish her sentence. She too had looked into the unfortunate room. Ciara turned around and quickly ran to the exit. Amélie tried to catch up with her. Eugene finally realized that he had been spotted. He jumped up, but only managed to walk a few steps and collapsed. Ciara, my girl, I beg you, wait. Her mother-in-law urged her, catching up with her at the door of the restaurant. Don't, please. You were right. Then I have no place in your family. Stop it. What are you saying? What am I saying? Why don't you check with your son? What a fool I was. How long has he been playing me for? Wait, give me just 1 minute, Amélie pleaded. I can imagine what you're feeling right now, but I'm just as confused as you are. I don't think we should jump to conclusions. Amélie, I understand your desire to protect your son, but how can you jump to conclusions? You saw it all yourself. I did. Amélie nodded. But this is nothing like my son. Let's do this. Will you give Stephen and me at least 12 hours? Now you promise me that in those 12 hours you won't do anything stupid and you won't run away. We'll take Eugene back to our place. You saw the state he's in. Okay, Ciara agreed grudgingly. But I don't know what will change in the meantime. At least we'll try to figure it out. Don't worry, there's no shame yet, except for you and me. No one's seen Eugene. I'll go back and tell the guests that the newlyweds have decided to celebrate at home alone. We'll try to get Eugene out of here without being seen. You go home. But again, please don't do anything stupid. I'll try, Ciara said, turning around and walking toward the house in her wedding dress. Where are you going? Amélie stopped her. Let me call you a cab. Her mother-in-law called Ciara a cab and sent her home. Ciara got there in a semi-fainting state. For her, everything that was happening was like a terrible dream that would not end. She collapsed on the couch and sighed heavily. Chiara stared at the ceiling silently, tears streaming from her eyes. She didn't even have the strength to change her clothes. She lay like that for several hours until she was awakened by the intercom ringing. Chiara didn't want to go open the door. She didn't want to do anything at all, but it wouldn't stop ringing. So then she forced herself to get up and open the door. Amelie and Stephen walked into the apartment. "Chiara, you have your laptop next to you. Is it busy?" my father-in-law asked. "Yeah, it was lying around here somewhere." Chiara opened the laptop and handed it to Stephen. "Great. Now you're going to see something." He inserted a small flash drive into the laptop and turned on the video. It turned out to be the restaurant's security footage. It showed Eugene standing and talking on the phone. At some point he felt sick, leaned against the wall and tried to go outside. At that point, the waitress stopped Eugene and asked him to come with her. She actually walked him up to the empty banquet room and laid him down on a couch. The waitress then stood at the front door and glanced back and forth at the next room, then at her phone. After reading some message, she stood by the door for a while longer and then approached Eugene. He awkwardly tried to push her away and mumbled something to himself. Then the waitress forcefully tried to kiss him. At the same moment, Chiara looked into the room. "So that's what this is all about," she said with rounded eyes. "I told you we'd figure it out." Amelie summarized the video. "Wait, so Eugene was drugged? How's he feeling right now? We should call the police, request an evaluation." "I don't think we're going to need the police here," Stephen told her. "Eugene is sleeping it off at our house right now. His pulse is fine, his blood pressure's fine. It's okay. He needs his sleep. I did the forensics myself. I just picked up Eugene's glass. I wouldn't mistake this blend for anything. It's just wine and vodka." "What do you mean, vodka?" Chiara was surprised. "We didn't even order vodka." Some waiter was diligently pouring Eugene a strong wine. Vodka it was. I saw, had regular wine, but Eugene, he's not very good with booze. Wine and beer are fine, but anything stronger, his body can't take it. Apparently, the organizers of this performance did not know about such a reaction of Eugene and thought that he would just be tipsy and would fall for some girl. But our fighter fell asleep early. Fantastic. Chiara couldn't get over the shock. So the cameras don't show who was involved in the wine and vodka spiking. No, they didn't have cameras in the kitchen. There are cameras at the bar, but I couldn't get footage there. I could barely get these from the security guard in the lounge. It was the same waitress who poured Eugene's drink, Stephen said. "So we have to talk to that waitress," Chiara whispered. "I'm not sure how they knew you'd get to the other room at the right time." "No, it makes sense," Chiara told her mother-in-law about the 2 mysterious phone calls in the note. "Listen, it's like a movie." Amelie wondered, "Why didn't you tell Eugene everything at once?" "I didn't think it was so serious. I thought it was just some kind of fraud. I didn't want to ruin Eugene's mood over nothing." Chiara sighed. "Yeah," Amelie nodded. "I wonder what his reaction will be when he wakes up." "I don't think it will be soon," Stephen answered. "Knowing some peculiarities of his body, he won't wake up until tomorrow morning." "What are we going to do then?" Chiara asked, confused. "That's right. I suggest we finish what we started. Call your mysterious admirer, tell him that you were wrong, and that you were convinced of what a traitor Eugene was. Thank him and ask him to meet you, preferably right away." Chiara understood, pulled out her phone, and did as Stephen told her. The meeting was set for half an hour later in a nearby public garden. Amelie and Stephen arrived there a little early, pretending to be a couple who decided to take a walk before going to bed. Chiara changed her clothes and went to the public garden 2 minutes before the appointed time. She saw a male figure walking towards her with a brisk gait. The stranger had his cap pulled low. It was impossible to tell who it was from afar. "Why didn't you want to give me your phone number that time, Chiara? You wouldn't have learned so much," the man said cheerfully and took off his cap. "So it's you," Chiara exclaimed. Before her stood her former classmate Noah Salvador. "I don't know how to thank you." "No way. It's enough to go on a date with me." How did you get all that information about Eugene? Connections. Connections, like the waitress at the restaurant where you work who can pour vodka into wine just in time? Ciara was slapped hard before she could finish. You used to be just an indecisive person, but now you've become even more vicious and pathetic. Suddenly, Ciara was approached by her father-in-law and mother-in-law. "What, so this is the show organizer?" Stephen asked. I see. But I think he could be prosecuted for slander. And if the actions with drinks are qualified as injury to health." "Oh, I'm afraid he won't get off with a suspended sentence," he said. "Ciara, I'm sorry," Noah said pitifully. "I just loved you all these years." "I can't stand to see you, you bastard." Ciara turned away and looked at Stephen and Emily. "Well, Ciara, I think this man's fate is in your hands," her mother-in-law said calmly. "What am I supposed to do with him?" Ciara sighed and turned to Noah again. "Then that's it, get out of here. But if I see you anywhere, even casually again, we will seek a criminal case. Do you understand?" "Yes," Noah answered obediently. He turned around and walked quickly towards the exit. Stephen and Emily drove Ciara to their family cottage. They chatted in the kitchen and mocked the previous day. As it turned out, the rest of the wedding guests had guessed nothing and continued to celebrate without the bride and groom. Eugene woke up the next day with a terrible hangover and huge memory lapses. He didn't even remember any of the waitresses. Ciara and her mother-in-law and father-in-law decided not to tell him anything. So unusually began a new family page in the life of a modest girl, Ciara. Helene reluctantly wandered home because she had been caring for her fading mother-in-law for a year and barely overheard. "Helene, shall we relax after the work week? Go to a cafe? Go shopping?" asked a full of cheerful woman at her colleague, coming out of the passageway of the furniture factory. "I would very much like to, but I cannot," answered Ellen. "And all with your mother-in-law tortured. You've had a cross to bear, Helene." "I'm not complaining. Who else could?" "All right, grace my streetcar." Ellen, an accountant at the furniture factory, ran to the bus stop to catch the streetcar. She couldn't find a free seat and got on the back of an old carriage. "With your mother-in-law, you're tormenting yourself." Helene couldn't get her caring colleague's phrase out of her head. It was about her 75-year-old mother-in-law. Ellen had been widowed a year ago and had the burden of caring for her husband's mother. Her mother-in-law, Lexi, was a difficult character. All her life she had worked in management positions and was used to being in control of everything. But a few years ago, her health began to fail. She began to walk with difficulty and had a microstroke. And the death of her son finally took its toll on Lexi. She could move around the apartment, but it was almost impossible for her to go outside, to the store without help. And at home there were cases when the woman could not stand on her feet and fell on the way to the kitchen. Therefore, Ellen tried never to be late at work and hurried home. It could not be said that she did this with any particular enthusiasm. Lexi's difficult temper, control mania, and sharp tongue made Ellen very uncomfortable. The older woman always knew best where things were, where Ellen needed to go, and what time to be home. Ellen felt like she was trapped in a tower with a dragon, and there was no telling when she would be able to get out. There were days when she just didn't want to go back to her mother-in-law's house. She could hardly contain her irritation and anger, lest she lash out at the sick woman. But Ellen realized that Lexi had no one left but her, and that taking care of her was the best memory of her husband. Ellen wasn't particularly cheerful this day either. She realized that now she was going to have to go through the routine of reporting on the previous day and listening to Lexi's instructions. When she got home, Ellen opened the front door, walked into the hallway, and heard her mother-in-law talking to someone on the phone. "You wouldn't believe how lucky everything turned out," Lexi said excitedly. That was the tone of voice she would use with her longtime friend Annie. Ellen didn't go into the room and decided to wait for the conversation to end. Close. Now I'll sell the apartment successfully and live out my last days with dignity. And my sister-in-law is free from the case. Signed the contracts today. I have all the documents in hand. At this point, Helen shuddered, alarmed, and began to listen even more attentively. What black realtors? You don't understand anything. Everything is legal, I tell you. Do not come to me. Stay at your place. Lexi was raising her voice more and more. They sometimes fought with her friend, but Ellen had never heard her mother-in-law talk like that before. Annie could use a harsh word, too. She worked in the legal department of the same company Lexi ran. Annie was retired now, but still interested in legal news, always warning her friend against new dubious schemes. Ellen heard her mother-in-law hang up the phone and walked into the room. "Good evening, Lexi." She said a quiet hello. "Ellen, hi. Listen, come here." The mother-in-law sat in her favorite chair, holding out some papers to Ellen. "Read it. What is it?" Helene asked, perplexed. "This is our happiness." Helene took the papers in her hands. On one of them was written a deed of gift. Ellen shuddered and continued reading. "I, Kaylin Lexi, being of sound mind and sober mind, donate the apartment, which belongs to me by right of ownership, to the organization." Ellen couldn't read any further. Eyes wide open, she looked at her mother-in-law. "What are you doing?" "Well, and you too, or what? Sit down." "I'll tell you everything," Lexi began. "A young man and a girl came to see me this afternoon. They represented some kind of social organization, which is engaged in helping the elderly and providing care for them. Anyway, they offered me a deal. I sell them the apartment. And they put me in a boarding house where I'll be cared for around the clock. You understand, Helen, I'm getting weaker as the years go by, and soon you won't be able to handle everything with me. And this way you'll go to live with yourself." "I don't understand." "What's not to understand?" "I sold the apartment for a little less than it would have cost on the market. For that, I get a place in a boarding house, a private room, a private nurse, and a view of the forest. Isn't that wonderful?" "Then why does it say deed of gift?" "Because it's faster. A sale, or whatever it's called, takes a long time to process. It's a lot of paperwork. This is just one signature, and that's it. But don't worry, it's all taken care of. Here, I took a receipt from them, where they agree to pay me $3 million. Lexi held out another piece of paper to Ellen. Ellen looked at it. It was a handwritten receipt. "You know," Ellen started hesitantly, "I'm not a lawyer, but I don't think receipts are issued in these cases." "Do you understand much?" The mother-in-law raised her voice again, now at Helene. "What, you wanted this apartment for yourself so badly? Don't worry, I don't need that $3 million. It'll be yours anyway." "What do I need your money for? What are you saying?" Helene started to justify herself. "I'm worried about being cheated." "It's all legal. What organization were these people from?" "Young Old Age, I think." Ellen took out her phone and quickly typed the name of the organization into a search engine. The first link started with the word scammers. She began scrolling through dozens of reviews, and each one told of schemes to scam the elderly. "Lexi, they're scammers." "Is that what they say on your internet?" Her mother-in-law wouldn't listen to her daughter-in-law. "It's all about writing nasty things." "Look, they put their address here," Lexi said. "If you want, you can go check it out yourself." Ellen took the sheet with the address, got dressed, and quickly left the apartment. The office of this organization was located in the heart of Swan's Town. Ellen had to take the streetcar again. The woman was very worried, and not because of the apartment. Ellen had her own apartment, where she and her husband lived. The children had grown up and moved to New York. The apartment was empty, and Ellen could always go back to it if she needed to. It wasn't what she was afraid of. Lexi might just not be able to survive something like this. Losing the apartment would be a real blow to her. And that wasn't the worst-case scenario. There was no telling what these people would want to do to Lexi to avoid taking care of her. Ellen didn't want to think about that. Yes, her mother-in-law wasn't the easiest person to deal with, and her daughter-in-law had suffered a lot because of her. But still a family member. Despite everything, Ellen treated her well. You just realize that everyone's temper is different, she thought. Especially when Ellen and her husband had just started their relationship. Lexi had helped them out a lot. That very empty apartment had been bought by Ellen, not without her involvement. So Ellen was determined to get to the bottom of the situation. Getting to the right address, the woman saw a small business center. Entering, she asked the janitor for the office number and went up to the third floor. It was a shabby building of some factory that had been hastily converted into office space. Reaching the right door, Ellen knocked and went in. "The workday is over," the woman sitting behind the desk said in a nasty voice. She was putting papers in a bag and was clearly leaving. "It says on the door that you work until 7. It's 6:55 p.m. Ellen said sternly. "All right, what do you got there?" "Your company scammed an elderly woman today, my mother-in-law." "Young lady, we're not scamming anyone. It's the law." "No, don't give me that bullshit. Your employees said they were a social organization. Is that right?" "We are a social organization," the woman interrupted Ellen for the second time. "A social organization for scamming the elderly. I've read your reviews. I demand that you immediately cancel all contracts." "Calm down, girl, calm down. We conclude all contracts in accordance with all legal requirements, so no one will cancel anything here." "Then I'll file a police report against you." Right. You're not the first, so to speak. First they watch their old people, then they run around complaining. You don't even hide the fact that people like you want to get rid of their elderly relatives. How dare you?" Ellen could not believe her ears. The woman unashamedly told her what their scheme was designed to do. What? How dare I? We're only making things better for you. What do you think, we don't have a boarding house? We're just trying to steal your naive relative's apartment. No, we do send old people to a place where they'll get better care than yours. It's just a whole apartment to pay for it. Well, what do you want? Business like this, times like this. I'll see you in court," Ellen said stiffly and walked out of the office. She couldn't believe this was happening to her. Fraudsters sitting in the center of Swan and not even hiding their dark intentions. What good would it do if Lexi was actually sent to a boarding house? She wouldn't live there long anyway, knowing she'd been scammed. No, these people had to be dealt with at any cost. So Ellen went to the police. Never in her life had she ever filed a report or gone to court. But now she was ready for anything, so strong was her anger toward these people. The police station was not far from the office center. Ellen reached it on foot in just 10 minutes. Once inside, she saw a sign that read "Duty Station." Ellen went to the window under the sign that said "Front Desk." "Hello, I'd like to file a report." "Take the form, write it down." The employee answered in a machine-like manner, holding out the form. He was on the phone and didn't even look at who was in front of him. Ellen spent a long time writing the statement, choosing the right wording. She wanted the police to get to the bottom of this as quickly as possible. When she had filled out the form, she handed it to the officer on duty. He finally took his eyes off the screen and began to read. "Okay, name, address, phone number." "Oh, young aging. Do you already know something about this organization?" We do. We've had 3 of these applications this month." "How are they being handled?" "It's not going well. We've already checked this company, everything's clean. So you're wasting your time trying to do something. This case is a dead end." "What do you mean, lame? Are you refusing to take my statement?" "Come on, citizen. We have no right to refuse to accept it. We'll just file it in a folder, and then all you have to do is wait." Helene left the office in a depressed state. She didn't know what to do next. She didn't want to go home for other reasons. She just couldn't say those words to Lexi that she had been cheated and there was no chance of justice. After reaching home, Ellen leisurely made her way up to the floor and entered the apartment. Usually Lexi was watching TV loudly, but this time there was silence in the room. "What's up?" the mother-in-law asked quietly. "We'll figure it out," Ellen whispered. So it was a hoax after all? Lexi was usually a long-winded person, but eventually she could be persuaded. This was one of those times. I guess so. Lexi covered her face with her hands. The old fool. "Come on, Lexi." Ellen ran up to her mother-in-law. "You and I are not alone. There are several reports on this office, so they'll definitely look into it." That's how I continued the story. Of course, Ellen hid the words of the front desk clerk from Lexi. What to do next, she didn't know yet, but now it was important to support her mother-in-law. so she had to make up some reassuring words. "You're like a child, aren't you?" Lexi lamented. "And I was happy about it." "I told you we'll figure it out." "Did they give you a timeline?" "Yes, they said that in 2 weeks we should pack up and move to the boarding house." "So we have plenty of time, 2 weeks," Helen nodded. In fact, she was thinking, I have to think of something in time. At least I'll lie that I got the money from them. The next morning, Ellen was awakened by a phone call. Usually, even on weekends, she got up early. But last night she couldn't sleep for a long time, so she lay awake until 10 in the morning. Glancing at the screen, she saw an undefined number and was startled. For some reason, she was suddenly sure that it was the same scammers calling. Ellen thought for a while whether to pick up the phone or not. In the end, she decided to answer. "Eileen Vasilievna?" a stern voice asked. "Yes, who's calling?" "My name is Swan. I'm an investigator. I've read your statement. I was wondering if you could come down to the station today." Yeah, what time should I be there?" "Right now. Just bring all the documents, contracts, and receipts." Helene quickly got ready, prepared her mother-in-law's lunch, and rushed to the station. She felt a sense of hope. It meant that at least the application had been taken into consideration and not just thrown into a folder. She didn't bother telling Lexi she was going to the police station, just that she was going on business. She wanted her mother-in-law to think as little as possible about the situation, even though she realized that was impossible. Especially since it was already 11 days from now, she would most likely have to leave. Ellen entered the now familiar building and approached the duty officer. There sat another employee who told her which office to go to. She walked down the long hallway almost to the end and saw a sign that read Senior Investigator Captain Swan. She knocked on the open door. "Hello, may I be Helen? You called me today?" "Good afternoon." "Come in and have a seat," replied the investigator's stern baritone. He was a stately man in his 40s with graying on his temples. He was actively typing something on the computer. Ellen hesitantly sat down across from him, and after about 20 seconds, Captain Swan turned his attention from the computer to her. "I'm sorry, there's so much to fill out," the investigator said as he began to look for something on his desk. "Aha, here. I have familiarized myself with your statement. I'll tell you at once. The situation is not new and rather sad. In neighboring cities, this scheme has long been known. 3 months ago, these scoundrels moved in here. I was told by the duty officer that there have already been 3 reports." Captain Swan twirled some papers in his hands. "Yes, that's right, here they are. But I'm a little more interested in yours than the others. Apparently, your mother-in-law was more meticulous. So the crooks had to do a little more paperwork with her. May I see the contract and the receipt?" "Sure." Ellen handed the papers to the investigator. "Interesting," Swan said, studying the documents. "But I expected more, of course." "What did you expect?" "That there would be some circumstances written into the gift contract analyzing it. You just wrote in the statement that they assured in writing about all the nuances of the transaction. But the promises there about board and care and such. And that information can't be contained in such documents, which means it becomes invalid. Well, no, these guys got it right." "What about the receipt?" "The receipt is interesting. The other victims were all verbal assurances. But your Swan looked at the statement. Lexi asked for some kind of written commitment. Did the receipt have any validity?" Sadly, no. A receipt is for a loan. This is just a promise to hand over money. So any court will send you away with a piece of paper like that. But either way, it's new. So we have at least a handwriting sample and an employee's signature. So if you don't mind, I'll scan this paper," said the investigator. Sure. And what should I do with my mother-in-law? I'm a straightforward person, so I will not hide. Prepare for the worst. Even if we catch on to something, it will take a very long time. You guys have 2 weeks to leave too, right?" "Well, we can't do anything in 2 weeks. There's practically no evidence. Everything is done according to the law." "Have you checked the boarding house? Maybe they poison old people there so they don't have to deal with them." "Of course, we didn't check 5-star hotels, but everything is legal. The conditions there are minimal. So if there's another place for Grandma, you'd better take her there." But they promised her personal nurses care nature. Isn't that slander? Can't they at least be prosecuted for that? Misinformation in advertising is an administrative offense, not a criminal offense, and a verbal promise. It would be hard to prove anything, and there's no need. Our task is to bring this case to bigger crimes. But with this kind of data, we're not going to be able to do that anytime soon. So you're suggesting we just give them the apartment and leave quietly? You already gave it to them? Not you. Well, your mother-in-law did. So you're in someone else's apartment right now. I understand your feelings, but I'm being as frank as I can and telling it like it is. I'll try to do everything I can. But I can't promise anything, especially in the near future. Hopefully they'll make a breakthrough soon and we'll be able to catch them by the tail. Okay, I get it. Thank you. Ellen walked out of the investigator's office. There was no point in hoping for quick help from the police, so she had to act on her own. She took her phone and began to scroll through the list of contacts. Ellen did not have any acquaintances in the authorities or the bar. The only person who had anything to do with law was Annie, her mother-in-law's friend. Without thinking, Ellen dialed her number. Annie, hi. This is Ellen, your friend Lexi Callan's sister-in-law. Hello, Lenotchka. I didn't recognize your voice right away, Annie replied good-naturedly. You know, we had a very unpleasant story with the apartment. Yes, I overheard you and Lexi talking yesterday. Anyway, you were absolutely right in your concerns. What a stupid situation. It's a common way to cheat, and I've told you about people like that many times. Why didn't she listen to me? Why don't I know what's gotten into her? They must have influenced her somehow. They have special techniques, like hypnosis. Distracting, misleading. And that's it, fooling our old ladies. Sounds like it. I don't remember Lexi agreeing to anything quickly. But I take it you're not just calling to share your concerns. Yeah, you're right. I just got off the phone with the police. They say it's a very complicated situation, and it's unlikely anything will change in 2 weeks. And in 2 weeks, Lexi has to move out. Of course, I'm not putting her in a boarding house. I'm taking her back to my place. But you realize what a blow this is going to be for her. I do. Luda's been very down lately. So yes, she doesn't need this kind of stress. Come to my place now. I have my son at home. He's a lawyer. Maybe we can work something out together. Ellen thanked Annie for the offer and rushed to her. In general, they did not see her mother-in-law's friend very often. While her husband was alive, they met only at general celebrations. After his death, a little more often, Annie lived nearby and once a week came to visit her friend. But at that time, Ellen was usually not at home. But even in those rare encounters, Ellen had formed a very good impression of the woman. Annie was a little younger than Lexi and had a completely different personality. Sometimes Ellen wondered how such two completely different women could be friends: the nervous, bossy Lexi and the good-natured, simple Annie. They were both quite emotional and could always stand up for themselves and their rights. When Ellen heard that Annie was willing to help, she was glad. Yes, she had no plan, and it would be foolish to expect an older woman, even though she was a lawyer in the past, to have one. Nevertheless, Ellen felt much calmer at heart. She quickly made her way to Annie's house, who lived a few blocks away from Lexi. Once she got to the 3rd floor, she rang the bell. The door was opened by a man in his 40s, wearing a cardigan and white shirt. Good afternoon. I'm here to see Annie, Ellen said a little shyly. Yes, come in, we're waiting for you. Ellen entered the apartment. I'm Christian, Annie's son, a lawyer. Nice to meet you, Helene replied and went into the room. It was furnished in a Soviet-style luxurious way: a full-wall closet, many sets, a huge crystal chandelier, and 2 wide leather armchairs. Annie sat on one of them. Sit down, Lenotchka. The woman pointed to the neighboring chair. Christian also came into the room and sat down on the chair next to it. Thank you for seeing me, Ellen said politely. Of course not. How could you not? Annie replied cheerfully. Let's get down to business. Do you still have the papers Lexi signed, or did you give everything to the police? No, just copies. I have everything with me. Ellen pulled a folder out of her bag and handed it to Annie. She handed it to Christian without even looking at the contents. We have a professional sitting here. Let him sort it out, said the old woman sneeringly. Actually, I'm not a professional, Christian said, studying the documents. I'm a criminal lawyer and I don't know much about civil contracts, but everything seems to be in order at first glance. I'll take a picture and send it to a colleague. Sometimes Ellen wondered how such two completely different women could become friends, nervous bossy Lexi and good-natured simple Annie. At the same time, they were both quite emotional and could always stand up for themselves and their rights. Hearing that Annie was willing to help, Ellen was overjoyed. Yes, she had no plan, and it would be foolish to expect an older woman, even though she was a lawyer in the past, to have one. Nevertheless, Ellen felt much more at peace. He specializes in that kind of deal. And the receipt? Take a look at it, please, Ellen asked. It's the same. I can't say anything. I can only give it to a handwriting expert. But I don't think that would do us any good, said the lawyer. I've just been thinking, Annie began to say. Actually, we have two ways, civil and criminal. We don't have any leads for the criminal one at first sight. Although if the investigator was interested in this case, it's for a reason. In the civil way, we can demand to challenge this contract, to recognize the deal as invalid. We can't, Christian interrupted my mom. I was immediately answered by a colleague. In general, we don't have any clues to go the civil way either. The scheme is known not only to us. These swindlers used to work in a neighboring town. He writes that they were not approached from any side, and sued, and in the pre-trial order tried to solve. All to no avail. Somehow they forced these poor old ladies to sign all the documents, and that's it. But that's all the better, Annie said cheerfully. Excuse me, why better? Ellen was puzzled. And that we have only an option to catch them in a criminal offense. And in the case of a successful resolution of the issue, we will not only be able to return the apartment of your mother-in-law, and also for a long time to put the whole gang. It sounds, of course, tempting, but you said yourself that there are no leads. That's just at first glance, Annie said. We need to find out as much as we can about how they work. I can't believe that someone like Lexi could sign off on everything so calmly, can you? She didn't sign it quietly. Even the investigator said that these social workers usually do without a receipt, a verbal promise Ellen remembered. It's still strange that they managed to calm her down with one single receipt, which has no legal force whatsoever, Christian objected. She didn't know that the receipt was null and void, Ellen objected. My dear, you remember Lexi well, don't you? Is it enforceable? It's not. You can't get away with that. That's true. The lawyer obviously remembered the character of his mother's friend. So I think we need to get them out in the open, Annie concluded. How do we do that? Ellen didn't understand. You have me, Annie, an old, lonely woman exclaimed. She glanced at Christian. Well, almost lonely, the perfect victim for this gang. We've got to get them on me somehow. They're coming after my apartment. So we're going to try to catch them on something. Mom, wait, are you being serious right now? Are you serious? Christian asked. Seriously. If anything, you'll be there for us. But Annie stepped in. Ellen, it's really, really dangerous. Maybe they won't hurt you, but what if they do use some kind of hypnosis, and you give them the apartment too? Well, you'll be around to interfere. Christian, I think, can organize everything for a good surveillance. But I don't know, the lawyer hesitated. Do you have any better options? Annie asked. No, Christian shook his head. If it were another woman sitting in your place, I'd be the first to suggest baiting. That's just it. So that's it. I don't want to hear it. It's settled. Why don't we get the police involved? Samantha suggested it. No, they won't help, Christian said. They're so busy, they don't care about our suspicions. Then how are we going to control the situation? What if we just can't intervene in time? We'll install video surveillance in the apartment, the lawyer replied. Do you have any special equipment? No, they only install hidden cameras in soap operas. We work a little simpler. An ordinary cell phone will do as a hidden camera. We'll make a video call. We'll put one cell phone behind the sideboard, for example, so that only the camera sticks out. And from the other phone we'll watch and listen. Simple, legal, and effective. Wow. Helene was surprised by the simplicity of Christian's idea. What did you want? Annie asked. They, the lawyers, are under strict supervision now. You can't make a move, but still. Ellen was worried about her mother-in-law's friend. Why don't I at least call the investigator? He seems to be a smart man, she suggested. No need, Helene, Christian said firmly. You see, they have everything by the book there. Surveillance, warrants, they'll ruin the whole operation. And in general, most likely they'll send us away. Ellen sighed heavily. She'd lived by the rules all her life. She'd never done anything so amateurish. Never had she or anyone around her had any problems with crooks or the police. So the woman felt like she was in a soap opera. Only she had to play one of the main roles, not of her own free will. But let me ask you, how are we going to point them at me? Annie asked. Here in the contract there is an address and phone number. Ellen pointed at one of the papers. Maybe you could call, say that the neighbors found out about them, and you, as a single woman, really need care. That's a great idea, Ellen. Christian, give me that piece of paper. Annie pulled out her cell phone, dialed a number, and waited for a connection. Unavailable. That was odd. Maybe they don't work on Saturdays? Ellen asked. I don't think so. Every client is worth their weight in gold. Such offices should take calls 24 hours a day. It's something else. Maybe I scared them off. Ellen remembered her trip to the company yesterday. When I was there yesterday, I promised them I'd call the police. So they got scared and decided to run out of town. That's a possibility, Annie thought. What if they hadn't had time to pack for the day? Christian joined the conversation. Maybe the phone was disconnected. But they hadn't had time to leave the office yet. They wouldn't want to lose a client who'd come to them on her own. What do you mean? Ellen asked. I mean that we have to go to them now. Annie didn't let her son answer. All three of them quickly got ready and went down to Christian's car. 15 minutes later, they were already there. There she is. Look, Ellen pointed to a woman with a bag coming out of the office center. I talked to her yesterday. Then what are you looking at? I'm going to give you a master class, Annie said, and was about to get out of the car. Mom, wait. Christian stopped his mom and went into the glove compartment. From there, he took out a cell phone and called it from his own. Put it in your pocket, just in case we're listening to you. Annie took the phone and got out of the car. Not many people would have agreed to take such a gamble, and there was no telling what moved her more, the desire to help her friend in trouble, or the interest to take part in a dangerous case. Annie quickly caught up with the woman, stood for a moment, took a breath, and called out to her. Excuse me, please, what happened? She asked. The woman turned around. I'm so embarrassed to ask this, Annie said in a pitiful voice. I think I'm lost. I left the house to go to the management company. Anyway, I've gotten really old. Do you have your cell phone with you? Have you called your family? Do you have a phone? What's the use of it? I don't have any relatives. They've moved away and left everything behind, the woman thought. What am I going to do with you? Do you even remember your address? I remember the street, not so much the house. Why are you like this? Let me take you to the street. Maybe you'll remember the area. Oh, my daughter, you're a lifesaver. Thank you. Wait, I haven't done anything yet. What street is there, Mayakovsky? We'll be there in no time. The woman took Annie under her arm. Come on, my car is not far away. Helene and Christian watched everything from the car. What are we going to do? Ellen was worried. Let's drive carefully behind them, Christian said, changed gears and carefully drove off. The woman put Annie in the car, got behind the wheel and drove toward Mayakovsky Street, where Ellen's mother-in-law and her friend lived. Do you think she took the bait? Christian asked. I think so, Helene replied. Christian kept his distance, following the con artist's car. This lady didn't look like she had much heart. She wouldn't just help out like that. She smells a prophet, Helene said. The phone was silent for 10 minutes. Helene and Christian even began to worry a little. Maybe the connection was broken, Helene suggested. But driving into Mayakovsky Street, a woman asked Annie, "Well, do you recognize it?" "I recognize the neighborhood, my daughter, I do." "Let me walk further on my own," answered Annie. "No, let me take you to the entrance," the woman insisted. Annie began to explain to the woman how to get to her house. A couple minutes later, the car was there. Ellen and Christian parked in a neighboring yard. "I'm not going to let you go so easily now," Annie said thoughtfully. "Come in and I'll make you some tea." "I'd love that," said the woman, obviously realizing that she had found her latest victim in this city. They walked slowly up to the apartment. Annie pretended to be a frail old woman, so she tried to move as slowly as possible. In the apartment, she sat the woman on a chair, moved the phone from her jacket into her pants pocket so that Ellen and Christian could hear everything, and went into the kitchen to make tea. "So what you said, no one from your relatives is looking after you?" the woman asked. "They've all gone away. They don't care about me." Annie was making up a story as she went along. "I never asked for anything. I always did everything myself, to the store, to the clinic, and to get money. But in recent months, something completely bad has become. Many people sometimes refuse. Now I've got a headache." "What's your name, my daughter?" "Isabel?" Annie asked. "I think you are very lucky to have met me today," the woman replied. "Yes, you've been a great help to me. I don't know how to thank you. And that's not the only reason. Now you're going to want to thank me even more," Isabel said. Annie gave a puzzled look on her face. The con artist continued. "The thing is that I work in a social organization. We are engaged in helping lonely old people, providing them with a dignified old age." "What a good girl you are. How do you do it?" Annie asked. "It's simple. We offer you a place in a wonderful boarding house on the banks of the river overlooking the forest. Good repairs, caring staff, and most importantly, you will not have to make any monthly payments. You will have a personal nurse, constant assistance, checkups in general, everything you want." "You say that so beautifully, but I don't have any savings. Everything goes on medication," Annie sighed. "You won't have to pay anything, I'm telling you. But you will benefit from it, won't you?" "I'll tell you straight, of course there will be benefits. First of all, such organizations are helped by the state. There are some benefits for charitable activities. And secondly, tell me, what do you plan to do with your apartment?" "I don't plan to do anything. I'll wait until I die. It'll go to one of my children and grandchildren." "Any of the same kids who left you here? It's one thing for them not to visit you or help you." "Come on, they're still kids. That's the way it is. Old people die, leave their possessions to their children. Whatever they are," said Annie. "I've been thinking about selling this place myself for a while now. Why would an old woman need so many rooms? But I was afraid to deal with those realtors." "If you do the paperwork yourself," Annie said thoughtfully. "Of course we will. And I'll be honest with you, that's where our second profit will be. A few % of the sale we will send to the accounts of our social organization. That money will go exclusively to help similarly lonely old people," said Isabel. "Well, at the end of your life, you can do a good deed." "Come on, what end?" "Think of it as the beginning," Isabel smiled. "Did I manage to please you, my child?" "And what do I have to do?" "Sign some papers." "Come to your place?" Annie asked. "You don't have to go anywhere. Our employee will come to you today, tell you everything in detail, prepare the necessary papers, and show you what you need to sign. All you have to do is to prepare your passport, and we will do the rest." "I'm very happy for you. You're very lucky today." "When is he coming?" "Right now." "No, you'll be home from 5 to 6. "Where would I go?" "Of course I will." "That's when a young man from our organization will come to see you." The woman said goodbye to Annie and left. Christian and Ellen waited until she left the entrance and got out of the car. They had 3 hours to prepare the operation. They went up to Annie's apartment. "Mom, you're a piece of work." Christian marveled at Annie's acting. "Mastery, you know," replied the old woman modestly. "Listen, this is all wonderful, but do we have a concrete plan of action?" Ellen asked. "That's what we're going to do now," said Christian. He walked around the room, looking at every corner of it. "I think we'll set up the camera here." He pointed to the center section of a long cabinet, where the Venetian crystal stood. "I've got a white phone case right here. I don't think it will be visible. Then we'll need to move the chair a little. And the other one too." Christian moved the chair half sideways with a slight movement. Then he walked over to a small black table and placed it exactly centered between the chairs. "Now the table and chairs will be visible on the camera," Christian said. "Mom," he said to Annie, "we'll have to make sure that all paperwork is done at this table. And in general, try not to leave the camera's field of view." "I understand," Annie nodded. "Tell me, will you use real documents? What if they have time to register something?" Ellen was worried. "Do I have a choice? I haven't made any other passports for myself. And it's dangerous to make forged copies, you know. It seems to me that the most important thing in our business is authenticity. They can't even think that something's gone wrong." "Don't worry about me. I'll definitely be able to read the document before I sign it," said Annie. "All right, let's say everything goes as it should." Ellen decided to imagine a possible situation. "He'll come in and start telling you about his services. You will pretend that you are very interested, that you are impressed. Then he will pull out a contract and ask you to sign it." "It won't be so fast from here," Lenotchka Annie interrupted her. "Then I'll start torturing him with all sorts of questions. Are they not crooks? How much will they sell the apartment for? Will they show any other documents?" Christian has joined the conversation. "Then you can move on to personal questions. Start pestering this person like the wife, like the kids. Jump to the discussion of the latest news. In general, Ellen, the task of the mom will be to make him irritated. You see, when a person is annoyed, he has less control and can start making mistakes." "Exactly," agreed Annie. "And the climax of the play will be the signing of the contract. He'll get his paper, and I'll turn from an annoying old lady into an experienced lawyer. I'll ask him a direct question. Why does it say here that it's a gift contract and not a sale contract?" He'll start making excuses. Christian made a slight movement to put the chair half sideways. Then he walked over to a small black table and placed it exactly centered between the chairs. "Now the table and chairs will be visible on the camera," Christian said. "Mom," he said to Annie, "we'll have to make sure that all paperwork is done at this table. And in general, try not to leave the camera's field of view." "I understand," Annie nodded. "Tell me, will you use real documents? What if they have time to register something?" Ellen was worried. "Do I have a choice? I haven't made any other passports for myself. And it's dangerous to make forged copies, you know. It seems to me that the most important thing in our business is authenticity. They can't even think that something's gone wrong." "Don't worry about me. I'll definitely be able to read the document before I sign it," said Annie. "All right, let's say everything goes as it should." Ellen decided to imagine a possible situation. "He'll come in and start telling you about his services. You will pretend that you are very interested, that you are impressed. Then he will pull out a contract and ask you to sign it." "It won't be so fast from here," Lenotchka Annie interrupted her. "Then I'll start torturing him with all sorts of questions. Are they not crooks? How much will they sell the apartment for? Will they show any other documents?" Christian has joined the conversation. "Then you can move on to personal questions. Start pestering this person like the wife, like the kids. Jump to the discussion of the latest news. In general, Ellen, the task of the mom will be to make him irritated. You see, when a person is annoyed, he has less control and can start making mistakes." "Exactly," agreed Annie. "And the climax of the play will be the signing of the contract. He'll get his paper, and I'll turn from an annoying old lady into an experienced lawyer. I'll ask him a direct question. Why does it say here that it's a gift contract and not a sale contract? He'll start making up all kinds of excuses." "That's what he'll get caught on," Christian said. "After all, everything will be recorded on camera." Very interesting. Ellen listened carefully to the plan. But how are you going to get out of signing the contract? You're not going to sign it, are you? Of course I won't, Annie replied. I'm going to pretend I have a heart condition. I'll ask for an ambulance. I think at that point he'll get scared and run away. He doesn't want any more witnesses. And he won't want to explain to the doctors who he is, how it happened. But that's not the whole plan. Let's say by some miraculous miracle, he gets me to sign this piece of paper. There will be 2 cups of tea on the table. After all, a gracious hostess is obliged to offer her dear guest a drink. After signing, I will awkwardly tip the cups onto the paper, and with a slight movement of my hand, the contract will turn to mush and rags. But eventually you'll figure something out and keep him out of the driveway with the contract, Ellen said. Just don't overdo it. And Tulloch Christian nodded. Well, Helene, are you calm now? Yes. Impressive, Annie said cheerfully. Good. Then you and Christian will need to be down to the car by 5 o'clock and watch in it near the driveway. And I'll probably go to Lexi's in the meantime. She's been sitting there alone since this morning. But I hope you realize that it's better not to tell her anything, Annie said. Of course I understand, Ellen replied and walked towards the exit. Leaving the driveway, she headed toward Lexi's house. Ellen was filled with conflicting feelings. On the one hand, it was very important and exciting for her to see this through for Lexi's sake. But on the other hand, she was very worried about Annie. At first glance, this older woman gave the impression of a confident person who was not afraid of even meeting with crooks. However, Annie was by no means young. There were too many things that could go wrong in this plan. 10 minutes later, Ellen was already in place. The TV was back on in the room, and Ellen realized that her mother-in-law had recovered a bit from yesterday. Lexi, how are you feeling? Ellen asked thoughtfully. Good, Ellen, why do you ask? But it seemed to me that you were feeling pretty bad about yesterday. Ellen was surprised by her mother-in-law's question. You know, I don't remember yesterday very well, Lexi said with the same calmness. What do you mean you don't remember? What about the condo deal? No, I remember that. I'll be living in a boarding house soon, Ellen, finally free of me. Maybe Ellen didn't realize what was going on right away. Her mother-in-law had never had a blackout before, not even after a stroke. You're not dizzy? Is your coordination okay? I'm telling you, I'm fine. Ellen went into the kitchen, closed the door tightly, and dialed the number of her mother-in-law's friend. Hello, Annie. There's something wrong with Lexi. She doesn't remember much about yesterday. It's just bits and pieces. She's just glad she got a place at the boarding school. What? I thought so. Annie exclaimed. Lexi couldn't just give up like that. They're putting something in, but it's all the more interesting. How is she feeling overall? She seems fine otherwise. Well, that means I won't die. Don't worry, Ellen, it'll work out. Annie hung up. Ellen became even more worried. Now, the danger to the elderly woman's health was not a perceived danger, but more than real. Ellen could not leave this situation so easily, and, after a little thought, dialed the number of Investigator Swan. Comrade Captain, hello. It's Ellen. We met this morning. Yes, you remembered something. The captain recognized Ellen immediately. No, there's a detail that's come up. Basically, my mother-in-law has been having memory lapses. I've never seen her do that before. I think she was drugged last night. Okay, this is interesting. Send her to the clinic for a blood test. I'll make arrangements to get it done quickly. But that's not all. The thing is, my mother-in-law's friend Annie and I have decided to, how shall I put it, increase the evidence base. And today the same organization is coming to her to sign a contract, and the whole process will be captured on camera. Of course, this woman will not sign any contracts. Are you out of your mind? Swan interrupted Ellen. What kind of amateur hour is this? Are you playing detective? Comrade Captain, we had no choice. We're running out of time. The apartment will soon be taken away, and because of this you jeopardize the life of another person. The captain was silent for a while. Okay, all right. What time is this event? A member of this organization should be here between 5 and 6. Damn, that's so soon. I'm out of town right now. There's no way I can make it by 5. I'll try to make it by 6. What's the address? Mayakovsky, 35, apartment 12. I wrote it down. Wait for me. Be careful. So maybe you'll send someone else to us? No, it's impossible. On what grounds? In short, try to delay this process as long as possible. Ellen was a little calmer after that conversation. Now, Annie, is there any insurance in the form of Investigator Swan? Ellen looked at the time. The clock read 15. She decided she needed to take Lexi to the lab. If the test results showed that there were some substances in her blood, it would be an ironclad reason for the police to intervene. Without thinking, Ellen hailed a cab and entered the room. Lexi. Remember, the district doctor once told about a special blood test for complex diagnosis of anemia? Ellen decided to latch on to the recent words of the medic who came to her mother-in-law's house. Of course, I remember, it still costs some huge money. I hope you're not going to suggest I get it done? Yes, that's exactly what I'm going to do. But you don't have to pay a lot of money for it. There's a promotion going on right now, free for the elderly. Until what date is the promotion? Till today. May. Ellen knew Lexi wouldn't pass up an opportunity for a free test she didn't really need. 5 minutes later, the cab pulled up and Ellen and her mother-in-law headed to the clinic. There was almost no traffic on a weekend day, and in 15 minutes the car was there. Helene took Lexi to the clinic, put her in a chair in the hallway, and went to the front desk. Very quietly, so that her mother-in-law would not hear anything, she asked, "Hello, where to come for a blood test?" "What kind?" strictly asked the girl. Ellen could not think of a wording for different substances. "Are you what, from the investigator?" Did not immediately understand the girl. "You should have said so right away." "We were warned. Go straight down the hall to room 14. Ellen and Lexi reached the lab. "Hey, why isn't there a line for this attraction?" Unprecedented generosity, wondered the mother-in-law. It's Saturday, the last day, and the elderly do not work, so they all went and did it on weekdays. Ellen found this excuse convincing. Luckily for her, the healthcare worker who took the test was silent, and Lexi, surprisingly, didn't ask any unnecessary questions. After a quick analysis, they went out into the hallway to wait for the results. Literally 10 minutes later, the health worker came out and silently held out a piece of paper to Ellen. "But what is it?" Lexi asked. "I can't see anything without my glasses." Ellen ran her eyes over the incomprehensible numbers. Everything seemed to be normal. Finally, she reached the last line, where it said in bold letters, "Not found." "Yes, everything's perfectly normal," Ellen said. "Come on, I'll call a cab." Ellen didn't know whether to be happy or not. It seemed that now there was no need to worry about her mother-in-law's health or Annie's. But now it was unclear what to pin on these con artists. What to show Investigator Swan? Everything depended on today's operation, which was less than an hour and a half away. The cab made it to Lexi's house just as quickly. Ellen took her mother-in-law to the apartment. "I'm going to call Annie and brag," Lexi said proudly as she walked into the room. "Maybe you shouldn't." Ellen hadn't had time to warn Annie about the examination, and calling her mother-in-law might cause some misunderstanding. She just wouldn't be able to make it, since today was the last day. "Yeah, you're right, you should have called sooner. Why do they give such late notice of their events?" Ellen didn't answer that question, but only warned Lexi that she would have to go out again tonight. "Where do you go so often?" "I always stayed at home on weekends, and you run here and there?" her mother-in-law asked incredulously. "Yes, I just have a friend came from New York. We studied together at the Institute, so I show her our city." "Yes, she will be very interested in our city after New York," Lexi commented wryly. "Well, go on, don't worry about me, I'll make my own dinner." Ellen was glad her mother-in-law was in a good mood. After waiting another half hour, she packed up and headed to Annie's house. She and Christian had agreed to meet a little before 5. When she reached the house, Ellen saw that Christian was already sitting in the car. He looked very tense. His mother was about to let the crooks into the apartment. Ellen opened the car door and got into the front seat. "What's up? How's Lexi doing?" "My mom told me you called her," Christian asked excitedly. "She's fine. I took her to forensics. They didn't find anything." Christian breathed a sigh of relief. They sat in silence for a couple of minutes before Helene decided to alert her lawyer. "I called the investigator after all. He said he could probably make it by 6. "What? But I asked you, Ellen, would it interfere with the whole operation?" "What was I supposed to do? Was Lexi's life in danger?" "I had to call to arrange the forensics. I didn't know they wouldn't find anything. I warned Annie, too," Ellen said. "Okay, maybe you're right." Christian thought about it. It was already 5 o'clock in the evening. Ellen looked at her cell phone, which was attached to the front of the car. There was a panorama of Annie's living room. The woman was sitting quietly in a chair reading a newspaper. Christian watched the entrance to the driveway carefully. 10 minutes had passed, but no one from the social organization seemed to have gone in there. After waiting another 5 minutes, Ellen decided to break the tense silence. "Christian, tell me, I don't know why I even wanted to ask this question. I guess it's important to me. Did you know my husband, Emmett?" Ellen wanted to break the awkward pause and could think of nothing better than to talk to Christian about her husband, who had passed away a year ago. She knew almost nothing about his friends. She had only seen some of his colleagues at work, and that was it. Of course, we were friends when we were kids. Our parents lived next door to us. Yeah, and my mom still lived next door to each other. And then what happened? Why did you stop hanging out? We grew up, we all became so important, so serious. Everyone's busy with business, families. There was no time for friendship. Well, I guess that's what happens to a lot of people. Then I went to work in Los Angeles, and I only came back here once in a while. I didn't have much contact with anyone here except my mom. It took me a while to find out that Emmett was gone. My mom called only 2 days later, so I didn't even have time to fly to the funeral." "How long will you be here now?" Ellen asked. "No, the law firm where I worked there went bankrupt, and I decided to come back here. I've been in private practice here for 6 months now. I thought LA would be boring, but as you can see," Christian grinned, "I'm not bored. It just pays less, but it's cheaper to live here, of course." "Yes, we're a lot of fun," Ellen said. "My mother used to tell me about you sometimes, by the way." "What do you say about me?" Christian asked interestedly. Helene was also interested. Yes, she did. The amazing thing is that the daughter-in-law not only did not abandon her mother-in-law, but also began to live and take care of her. Especially since I remember Lexi's bossy personality from childhood. No way. She's all alone. I couldn't do anything else. You're right about the temper, of course. It can be tough. But she's done so much for me and Emmett in her time. I'll be grateful to her for the rest of my life. So I try to ignore her barbs and just do my duty. You have a heart of gold? I can't imagine my ex-wife helping my mom if something happened to me. You know, when Emmett was alive, I couldn't imagine living with Lexi either. Ellen smiled. But as you can see, it's okay. It's tolerable. So you shouldn't be talking about your ex-wife. No, it was clear from the beginning. Christian smiled too. He wanted to continue, but he thought it would be inappropriate to discuss his ex-wife with Helene. You can't determine in advance how a person will behave in a difficult situation. If someone had told each of us 3 days ago what we were going to do now, no one would have believed it. But the way life turned out. I would never have believed that I would be trying to catch criminals, Ellen said. Neither would I. We lawyers tend to be a little on the other side. We're not supposed to catch criminals. We're supposed to defend those suspected of crime. The one person I would certainly never doubt is Annie. She'll come to the aid of anyone, anytime. Yeah, Mom's doing great. She's hanging in there. I'm worried about her youthful enthusiasm, of course. But that's what she lives for. I think without adventure, she'd lose interest in life. You must have gone into it? Christian asked. Lawyering, even in criminal cases, is not an adventurous occupation. I might have gone into it, But I'm a much more free in life, replied Helen. I'm more like my dad, I guess. Mom did not immediately accept my choice to become a lawyer. She kept saying, how can I defend criminals? And what did you say to her? I said what any professional lawyer would say. We're not defending criminals, we're defending justice. A man can be wrongly accused of something he didn't do. That's where we come in. But very often criminals are arrested at the scene of the crime. Do you still fight for these cases? For example, would you defend the people in this office who took Lexi's apartment? You're asking very difficult questions, Ellen Christian replied. I apologize if I said something I shouldn't have. No, it's okay. That's exactly the question I can't answer. Of course, I won't defend these scoundrels. The thing is, I have a personal interest here. After all, these people cheated my dead friend's mom, and they're going to cheat my mom. And when there's a personal interest, we're prohibited by attorney ethics from pursuing this matter. Ellen leaned back in her seat and thought. But not about lawyer ethics, but about Christian. She liked his way of answering questions, his calmness and judgment. She found something in common between Christian and her husband Emet. And for a few seconds Ellen even thought she was beginning to like him. But these reflections were interrupted by Christian himself. Helene, look, he said, and pointed toward the entrance. A young man in a suit and a leather bag is standing by the intercom. I think that's our client. Maybe just a neighbor, Ellen suggested, looking at the broadcast from Annie's apartment. In any case, we'll find out now. A few seconds later, they heard the intercom ringing through the phone. Annie got up from her chair and walked out into the hallway. Hello, I represent the social fund to help the lonely, came a voice. Here is the edited text with names and cities replaced. Our employee told us all about you, came a voice from the microphone of the phone in the closet. It was hard to hear separate phrases in the hallway, but they were audible in the car. Annie did not delay the swindler at the door and immediately invited him into the room. And I've been waiting for you for 20 minutes. I've been on my nerves. The woman again entered the image of an infirm, restless old woman. But I'm sorry, I have a lot of things to do. I have to go around and help everyone. The employee explained his delay in a kind tone. I understand. I guess you have a lot of people like me? Quite a lot. But you can't create a place for everyone in the boarding house, you know. So you're very lucky. I don't know why I'm so lucky, Annie pretended to be confused. Oh, that's right. I didn't even offer you tea, but I will refuse to despair. Annie went into the kitchen. Christian and Helene watched the swindler closely. A simple-looking young man with glasses and slicked-back hair began to look around the apartment. At one point he came close to a cabinet, probably to evaluate a set. Ellen already thought that now he would notice the cell phone with the camera on, and that would be the end of the operation. But no. After looking at the set for 10 seconds, the young man switched his gaze to something else. Here I am. Annie came into the room with a tray with a teapot and 2 cups. What a thoughtful hostess you are. It's a lot of work, the man muttered. But why not take care of such an expensive guest? What did you say your name was? I'm Carl, junior assistant manager. Why are you such a mature man? Just a junior assistant, Annie began to implement her plan to psychologically pressure the con artist. Why not? I'm still a young man. Is that what you think? Youth is a moment, you know. Before you know it, you're old. So you have to work harder. That's what I'm doing. The con man's tone became less kind. Let's get down to business. I need your passport. Here, I've prepared everything as you asked. Annie pointed to the table where the passport was lying. Have a seat, so we'll fill it out, she invited. The man sat down in the chair, took out some papers, and began to leaf through the passport. Uh-huh. Annie Swan, so she's the one. And you, Carl, why are you standing there? You want to check my martial law? Oh, come on. Why would I want to check your marital status? Carl tried to smooth things over. Most likely, the man wanted to get some information about the elderly woman's relatives. And why did you look through it then? Annie kept up with Carl. I was looking for a residential address. I needed an exact address. So you could have just asked me what you were looking for. What? I don't know my address. I'll tell you what, Annie was beginning to talk professionally to the con man. The camera poorly conveyed the expression on Carl's face, but from his gestures it was clear that he was tired of what was happening. Annie, I'm begging you, don't give me a hard time. This is an important document, by the way. I'll take a look at it. The woman snatched the sheet out of Carl's hands. Wow, a deed of gift. I'm giving you this apartment as a gift. Please don't rush things. The man took the document back. It's the right thing to do. Don't worry, you won't have to wait for the deal to be finalized. And in 2 weeks, you'll already be in the boarding house. Oh, but very clever. Only I heard on TV that they can register a sale in 9 days now. You should watch less TV. The man was very annoyed. Why are you yelling at me? Grandma's old. She doesn't understand everything at once. I'm just filling out some very important documents, you know. And here you are with your unnecessary comments. So where are the documents for the apartment? You know, like the registry or the certificate. Annie persisted. Isabel told me I only need a passport. Do you think we're going to get an apartment without her papers? She probably just forgot to tell you. I don't know where those documents are. Ellen was distracted by the phone ringing. It was Investigator Swan. She took the call with a trembling finger. Yeah, she's here. Oh, great. There's a red Opel in the driveway. You see it? Yes, please get in. Helene dialed the phone and spoke to Christian. The investigator will be with us in a moment. A couple minutes later, the back door of the car opened and Swan got in. What's going on here? He asked angrily. We're watching the apartment. Ellen pointed to the camera feed. Wait a minute. I think the best part is coming up. In the apartment, meanwhile, the man was emotionally explaining what the documents for the apartment looked like. After 5 minutes of explanation, Annie gave up. I remember, they're in the other room. Now, Carl, wait, I'll get them all for you. Annie stood up and leisurely shuffled into the other room. The man glanced at her, then took a dark vial out of his bag, opened it, and dribbled a few drops into the woman's cup. Christian and Ellen didn't immediately realize they had to run to save Annie, but the investigator reacted instantly. Okay, let's go quickly. All three of them got out of the car and ran to the entrance. Christian opened the front door with his key, and then the apartment. Everybody stay where you are, nobody move. Swan shouted, and with a deft move he knocked the con artist to the ground. All right, don't touch the cup or the vial with your hands. We're going to get some experts down here to look into this. The investigator handcuffed Carl and reported the incident by phone to the department. Mom, did you drink tea from this cup? Christian asked worriedly. No, of course not. I knew right away that the bastard wanted to take advantage of my absence. So it was a setup, whispered the man lying on the floor. It's all right, you can't prove anything. Of course we won't. Christian took the phone out of the set and stopped the recording. Yes, we can. Comrade investigator, please include the recording from this phone in the case file. Swan took the phone. 10 minutes later, a task force was already on the scene. The swindlers were taken to the department. The expert put the cup and the vial back in his briefcase. The officers briefly interviewed all the witnesses of the incident. They acted quickly. Apparently, there were a lot of calls today. After the team left, Investigator Swan decided to stay in the apartment and interview everyone in detail himself. Annie and Ellen sat in the chairs. Christian had brought chairs from the kitchen for himself and the investigator, but Swan wouldn't sit down. First, he watched the camera footage in snippets. Then he went to the window, thought, and turned to those seated. What is it, citizens, detectives? Let me ask you a few questions. The investigator looked each one over carefully and stopped on Christian. Was your idea with the telephone? Yes, Christian answered and lowered his eyes. He probably thought that the investigator would start lecturing him about the illegality of secret surveillance. Original. Swan complimented Christian. For the first time in my career, I'm proud of the bar. They can't get away with that kind of evidence. Next, he turned his gaze to Annie. You? How did you even decide to do this? Is it boring to sit idle, comrade captain? Annie answered calmly. And the fact that they used some substances, I realized from the very beginning. You're a very brave woman, Swan said in a steady voice. After a moment's silence, he continued with a puzzled expression. I just cannot understand how, if they use such crude methods, they could not catch them neither in our department nor in other cities. After all, dealing with apartments is one thing. Poisoning the elderly with some unknown crap is another. I think I know what it is, Ellen said timidly. They haven't used such crude methods before. I don't understand why they suddenly decided to use poison in their last two scams, Swan asked. The thing is, first of all, it's not poison, but some kind of sedative that impairs attention and memory. And secondly, I think they had this vial with them on every deal, just in case, like a plan B. It's just that before that they came across quiet, naive old ladies who were really lonely and unhappy, and were happy for any opportunity to provide themselves a decent old age and help their distant relatives. It was enough to talk to them, to convince them to give the apartment. Therefore, the swindlers did not need to put anything in the tea. Everything happened by itself, but here, they ran into an elderly woman first. She must have started questioning and sarcastic behavior from the doorstep. I don't know how she let them in the first place. I think the con artist used a psychological trick, interrupted the girl investigator. It is unlikely that they began to bully her from the doorstep. Did they say anything about the apartment? About charity, aid, social, state program? But that is, they began to ride on the ears, and when they were already in the apartment, they got down to business. Well, maybe, agreed the girl. So they could not cope with the manifestations of the character of an elderly woman for a long time. First, they invented this unfortunate receipt. Apparently, it didn't help. Then the swindlers remembered about the presence of Plan B, and somewhere poured the contents of the vial to put this woman's guard down. The actress, with the help of her talent, was able to repeat this situation. First pressurized the man with questions, hurt him with barbs, and she managed to piss him off, because of which he took up the method already tested on that woman. Bravo. The investigator nodded his head approvingly. It all fits together now. I began to guess something. When you told me about the fact that before the receipt did not appear in these transactions, on the one hand, I realized that it was the result of the persistence of that woman. And on the other hand, I did not believe that it was possible to get rid of the pressure with one piece of paper. The girl hesitated. But wait, if everything was as I just told, then why today at the examination in the blood of that woman did not find anything? I think that question will be answered by the results of the analysis of the contents of the vial. But in my practice, I've seen such substances, which are eliminated from the body in a few hours. The con artist must have used something from this series. The investigator did not have time to finish his sentence. He was interrupted by a phone call. Oh yeah? How come? Who was the interrogator? I see. We'll think about it. Swan's face darkened, and he sat back in his chair. The con man doesn't want to help our investigation, the investigator said. He's talking and acting on his own. He's never heard of any cooperation. How could he not? Annie exclaimed. Why would he say that? He's looking at a much longer sentence. They said he'd get a lighter sentence for cooperating. Yes, I suppose they did, said Swan. He was questioned by a young investigator. His superiors told him to split the cases evenly, so they did. I think these officers had a third contingency plan to act weird. Either they were promised a lot of money, or they were threatened. I don't see any other reason why a small-time con artist would want to incriminate himself. So what do we do now? Ellen asked anxiously. Can't we bring the whole office to justice? It will work. It will work, the investigator reassured her. As far as I understand from your testimony, one of the organizers is a woman named Isabel. If she, of course, gave her real name, she should be detained and arrange a confrontation with the swindler Carl. And on what grounds will you detain her? If this guy is silent? Annie asked. On the basis of your statement. You made an appointment with her first, didn't you? That's grounds. Of course, it's not enough for a trial, but I think she'll tell everything after the first confrontation. Then we'll find all the strings, and we'll be done. The investigator looked at Ellen. "And you, I'll ask you to bring your mother-in-law to the station. In principle, it's better for everyone to be there. But it is Lexi who will have to participate in the climax of the confrontation. Isn't it right that the two con men came to her place together?" "Yes," she told about a young man and a woman. Ellen nodded. "Good. So in an hour and a half I expect you at my office." But she doesn't remember much. What am I going to tell her? The main thing she remembers is that it was just the two of them. The details don't matter. Suddenly the investigator's phone rang again. He listened silently, said thank you, and hung up. Well, as I thought, the tea was laced with a sedative, which is quickly eliminated from the body. It's harmless in most cases, the investigator said. He remembered where the phone call had interrupted him. What should I tell my mother-in-law? But think of something. You have a good imagination. All right, time to go to work. We have to find this woman first. The investigator left. Ellen went to Lexi's mother-in-law's house. She had a rough idea of what she was going to say to the old woman. "Don't worry, I have some bad news for you," Ellen began. "The thing is that yesterday some con artists came to your apartment, but they were caught. So your apartment is not in any danger." "What are you talking about? How awful." "I let those people into my house." Lexi was upset. "There's no need to feel bad about it. You're the reason they were apprehended. Here are partially not lying. There's no telling how many more elderly, lonely people these crooks would have managed to scam if they hadn't run into you. So what do we do now?" "Nothing. Everything will stay the same. Except you're going to have to go to the police for a lineup." Lexi was worried at first, but then she calmed down a little. An hour later, Ellen was about to call a cab, but she got a call from Swan. "Ellen, the confrontation is canceled today. We haven't been able to find the organizers yet. The office is empty, cleaned out to the last piece of paper, so it's going to have to wait." Ellen warned Lexi not to go anywhere today. Ellen began to worry again. What if the crooks managed to get away? Would the court void the deal? The situation was escalating. First the employee refused to testify, now Isabel had run away. Ellen could only hope for the professionalism of law enforcement. The next day, Ellen woke up to a call from the investigator. "Everything's fine. She's in custody. She got a bolo on her way out of town. Good thing you got her license plate number. And that she's already been questioned? Yeah, she doesn't know or remember anything either. She refuses to testify. So take your mother-in-law and come down to the station right now." 20 minutes later, Ellen and Lexi were sitting outside the coroner's office. The confrontation had already begun, and they could hear snippets of it in the hallway. "So you're saying you don't know this man?" The investigator asked questions loudly. "And you say that you see this woman for the first time?" The con artist refused to answer. Swan tried for another 5 minutes to crack the suspects, but to no avail. Then he went out into the hallway and called Lexi into his office. "Citizen Kalin, please tell me, do you recognize these men?" asked the investigator. "Yes, of course," Lexi answered. "They came to see me 2 days ago, promising me a good old age." Carl and Isabel's faces changed immediately. It was obvious that they realized the failure of all their plans. "Thank you," Swan said. "Sign here, please." The investigator handed the paper and pen to the older woman. "Everyone, please wait," he asked. In the hallway, a pale Lexi. Once again they sat down in the chairs outside Swan's office. For the first time in the last couple days, Ellen could breathe a sigh of relief. It was finally over. A few minutes later, 2 police officers entered the office and led the criminals out. "Ellen, come in." Swan's voice was heard. Ellen entered the office. Lexi remained sitting in the hallway. "What's up?" Ellen asked anxiously. "Did we crack?" "Yes, great," replied the investigator cheerfully. "But I didn't understand why they went to Lexi's place together." "They always went everywhere together," Swan explained. "The young man did all the dirty work. The woman was just scamming old people for money. They were about to call it quits, probably to another town. But your Annie got in hand and Isabel quickly sent Carl to register her, while she covered her tracks. They caught the con man. Isabel thought she was lucky it wasn't the two of them. But it wasn't to be. What scoundrels they were. Ellen was outraged. Yeah, but thanks to you and Lexi, we were able to catch them, Swan summarized. With this evidence, they'll be gone for at least 10 years. Well, thank you notes for you, your mother-in-law, and your fellow lawyers, Swan said. I'll do the paperwork. What about Annie? I think we should do something separate for Annie, Ellen replied. I'll write a report to my superiors about giving her an award and a bonus. After all, she was risking her health. Who knew what was in that vial? So we'll give her the highest honor. Ellen said goodbye to the investigator and walked out into the hallway with Lexi. They went home. The worst was over. As it turned out, all these adventures had a positive effect on Ellen's future relationship with her mother-in-law. Lexi practically stopped pressuring her daughter-in-law and began to communicate with her simply as a good friend.